you so much for making the time to join us today. We know this Zoom life is not always easy, and we appreciate you making the time to join us for this important discussion today. So thank you so very much. Before we start going on with the formal agenda that I shared with you, I'd just like to ask everyone to very briefly introduce themselves, so we can put a name on your faces, which, by the way, is very nice to see you all somehow in person. So I'm going to start, and then I'm going to move on to Paul. I'm going to call you one by one, and then if you can just share your name, affiliation, or department, if you're an academic, that would be great. So I'm Sophie Gilbo. I work for the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction in Toronto, Ontario. So Paul?
I'm Paul Kovacs. Hi, everybody. I'm with the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, Western University. I'm an economist.
Lori?
Hi, everyone. I'm Lori Peak, and I'm in the Department of Sociology and at the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Thank you. Jennifer?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Tobin. I'm the Deputy Administrator of the Natural Hazard Center at the University of Colorado Boulder.
Thank you. Next up, Sean Magnussen.
Hi there, I'm Sean. I'm in Vancouver, and I'm a specialist in wayfinding, search and rescue, and emergency management.
Great, thank you, Sean. Jeff Birchall.
Hi, I'm Jeff, University of Alberta in the School of Urban and Regional Planning.
Thank you. Gordon.
Gordon McBain. I'm at the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction in Western University. I guess I study both now the policy stuff, but used to study the, let's say, the natural sciences of storms and droughts and floods and stuff. So thank you.
Thank you, Gordon. Brent?
Hi, I'm Brent Doberstein from the University of Waterloo, Department of Geography and Environmental Management.
Thank you. Tara McGee?
Hi, I'm Tara McGee, University of Alberta, Department of Earth and Atmospheric Sciences. And my research focuses on wildfire, social science aspects of wildfire.
Thank you, Tara. Next, we have Jack Rozzolski.
I'm Jack Rozzolski. I'm in Toronto at York University, where I'm a professor of disaster and emergency management and director of the graduate program. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Next up, we have Jean Slick.
So Jean Slick, I'm associate professor at Royal Roads University, teaching in our Master's in Disaster and Emergency Management program, and my research focuses on emergent response to disasters.
Great, thank you very much. Jocelyn Stacy.
Hi everyone, I'm Jocelyn Stacy. I'm at University of British Columbia, and I'm a law professor here.
Thank you, Jocelyn. Ida.
Hi, I'm Ida Mamuji. Nice to meet you all. I'm with the Disaster and Emergency Management Program at York University and also the coordinator of the undergraduate program.
Thank you. Jeremy?
Hi, it's Jeremy Paulus. I'm starting my PhD this fall at University of Waterloo in focusing on health economics and treatment. I am also a crisis manager at Aviva Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Next, the other Lori Pierce. If you could, yeah, thanks.
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me today. It's nice to see so many familiar places and new faces. So my name is Lori Pierce, and I'm with Royal Roads University with the Masters of Disaster and Emergency Program, and also the Justice Institute of British Columbia, also in Disaster and Emergency Management, with a pretty broad-ranging area and focus. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. Next, we have Megan Fleming.
Hi, I'm Megan. I'm from Queen's University. I'm doing my Master's of Health Promotion at the School of Kinesiology and Health Studies, studying risk perceptions of wildfires.
Thank you, Megan. Next up, we have Heather Mcgrath.
Hi, Heather Mcgrath. I'm a research scientist with Natural Resources Canada, looking at flood mapping, risk assessment, and the communication of those.
Thank you, Heather. Greg Olahan.
Hi, everybody. I'm Greg Olahan, now an assistant professor in geography at Arisen University, and previously happy member of ICLR. So it's good to see so many familiar faces. Looking forward to today. Thanks.
Thank you, Greg. Next, Harry. I'm not sure. Sorry if I mispronounced. Harry Boo?
Yeah, it's me. Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi. A lot of old friends and new friends. I'm Harry from Dalhousie University.
Thank you. All right. I'm just next we have Christine Gibb.
Hi, I'm Chris Gibb. I'm in the School of International Development and Global Studies at the University of Ottawa.
Thank you. Next, Max Kiel. I'm not going to say your last name. Sorry.
Yeah, good luck with that, right? Yeah, my name is Max Kienatida. I'm with the National Research Council at Canada, and I work on fire safety, human behavior, and fire. My background is in experimental psychology.
Thank you, Max. Ryan Reynolds?
Yep, so I'm Ryan Reynolds. I'm a postdoc at UBC with Dr. Stephanie Chang. I look at largely tsunami evacuations, risk management, and risk communication.
Thank you, Ryan. Next up, we have Sue Horton.
Hi, I'm Sue Horton. I'm a professor of health economics at the University of Waterloo. And this is a new link for me, but I am the supervisor of Jeremy Paulus, who's going to start with our program in the fall.
Thank you very much, Sue. We have also David Etkin.
Hi, everybody. I'm a professor of disaster and emergency management at York University. I work with Ida and Jack. My main areas of research related to different aspects of risk and emergency management ethics.
Thank you very much, David. I think that's it for now for the introduction. If I forgot anyone, or if you've joined after, could you please just type up your name and affiliation in the chat box so everyone can see it? And with that, I'll just pass it over to Paul for his introduction. So thanks, everyone.
Greetings, everybody. In a moment, we're going to go through a little bit of some of the work ICLR has been doing over the last few years on disaster quick response research. But for more than 20 years, we've been trying to support disaster research in Canada, understand who's doing what, and how to make sure that we're helping people connect into the best science any way we can. One of my observations is that over the last 20 years, I've met a lot of people from the natural sciences, a lot of engineers, meteorologists, hydrologists, from many different science backgrounds who are involved in looking at flooding and earthquakes and wildfires, etc. In the social sciences, the community is much smaller. And that's not necessarily true in other countries, but in our country, I would love to see more of us join calls like this and talk about our work and to grow this community over time. I think that one of the experiences that we have had as we've been working with some really clever engineers and hydrologists and others, there's a lot of solutions that have come out of the science community, but they're not being used. There's a number of things that, you know, the issue is not necessarily studying, it's not that they've solved all the problems, but some of them think they've solved a lot of them, but their findings are not being applied. And I think there's a broader community of people like those of us on this call today who can help take Canada's management of hazards and make it better. And I would love to see this community grow and build over time. One of the specific opportunities that we identified a few years ago is that Laurie and Jennifer are part of a broader exercise going on in the United States where at a minimum, when an event occurs, sometimes there's some research that can be done immediately that can build over time into some really important breakthroughs. But you need a chance to get there fast and get to the site before everything has changed. And so could the focus that Laurie and Jennifer will talk about in terms of what's been going on in the United States in terms of a capacity to respond quickly. Could we try to support that in Canada? So that's part of the conversation today. What would make for a stronger capacity in our country of people interested in doing this kind of research, learning in the moment when something critical is happening. It can influence the kind of work you do over a longer period of time. And again, one of my hopes is that it would allow Canada to have a better hazard management, disaster management, in part because we come from more knowledge, more understanding of what's actually happening. So we've had an opportunity over a couple of years now to work with several of you to support those interested in doing quick response research. We've been trying to learn from the longer experience that's been going on in the United States. And so we thought this would be a really good opportunity to bring this community together, start talking. And so part of what Sophie's going to take us through with Sophie and Laurie and Jennifer, we're looking to hold 3 meetings, the first one today, and we'll see where we go after 3. But to talk about how to get ready if you were going to go out in the field and do some research. And then a follow-up meeting where we talk about some of the things you need to do to be ready for what happens when you're there in the moment. And then a final meeting about what you do afterward and how you write it up and how you use that to get funding and to get people to understand what you discovered and what you found. Anyway, there's a sense that over the course of us coming together, we hope we can build a community interested in the capacity to respond in the minute of an event. But that is part of a bigger objective that I would love to see, to have a broader community of people from the social sciences, the decision behavioral sciences, who are able to be helpful, take this country's knowledge and science and understanding of these issues to a different level. So that's my hope of what we'd like to do today and what we'd like to do over time. So Sophie, thank you with the opportunity to say something first. And then Sophie, do I send it over to Laurie next?
Yes, Laurie, please.
Laurie.
Thank you so much, Sophie and Paul, for inviting Jennifer and I to join. And it's so good to see so many familiar faces, as the other Laurie Pierce said, and also to meet new people that I've seen your names. And so what Sophie and Paul asked Jennifer and I to do here at the outset was, for just about the next 10-15 minutes, we were going to share a little bit of background on some of the efforts at the Natural Hazard Center and through our new National Science Foundation funded Converge facility that several of you are actually already involved in, and that has led to this sort of further strengthening of a long-term partnership between the Natural Hazard Center and the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction. And so I'm going to go ahead and share my slides now, and then I'll turn it over to Jennifer, and then we'll come back to everyone. Okay, Sophie, can you see my slides? Okay. So again, on behalf of myself and Jennifer, we just wanted to say hello, to welcome everyone, along with Paul and Sophie. And also we wanted to especially thank the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada for the funding support for this workshop series, which was going to be an in-person workshop series, but we have obviously moved it online given the state of our world right now. And so Jennifer and I, before we launch into our presentation, we first and foremost wanted to acknowledge all of the team members, the undergraduate students, the graduate students, the postdocs, both past and present, and Haorei Wu, I am looking at you, at the Natural Hazard Center, who have contributed to every effort that we're going to speak to you about today, and we really wanted to acknowledge their contributions. So to start this off, before we start sharing information with you, we actually wanted to ask a question of you. And so our first question that we hope you will please use the chat box to respond to. If you had unlimited resources, what is one investment that you would make to further advance quick response research in Canada? So I'm going to pause for about 60 seconds, and then if everybody would please put your response in the chat box. This is fantastic, everyone. Thank you so much. And please know that Sophie, Paul, Jen, and I will work together to download and then to share the responses from this chat box, because some of the questions that we're going to ask throughout today are going to inform the next two research workshops that we're going to help to facilitate. Because as Paul said, this is really important that this first workshop, we're going to be focusing on preparing to conduct quick response research, while the next two workshops will focus on the during and the after. So this question about if we had unlimited resources, which of course we know none of us do, and we're obviously entering into what will likely be a more resource scarce environment that is going to further require us to think creatively and to think collectively and collaboratively about how we can do new and different things together. But it was this question about advancing hazards and disaster research that actually has led the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction, SSHRC, in the Canadian context, as well as the National Science Foundation in the US context, to actually invest in a series of new platforms, research coordination networks, data sharing infrastructure and cyber infrastructure, as well as various facilities that do have equipment that is shared use and for the broader hazards and disaster research community. And so we're going to be sharing about some of those resources over this workshop and the subsequent two workshops. But I wanted to start today by talking to you about the specific facility that I direct, that is one of 12 facilities in the natural hazards engineering research infrastructure for the United States that is funded by the National Science Foundation. And so the Converge facility was established in 2018, and it actually joined a much larger network of research facilities that had already been supported by the National Science Foundation, all of which were led by engineering professors at academic institutions across the United States. But Converge was added to this larger research network to encourage exactly the kind of social science and interdisciplinary research that you've already been hearing about and that I saw you write about in the chat box today. And so the mission of Converge is really threefold. First and foremost, the mission is to encourage the ethical conduct and the scientific rigor of hazards and disaster research across the disaster life cycle through providing free online training and other resources. Our second mission area is related to identifying, connecting, and coordinating researchers both within disciplinary communities, but also across disciplinary communities to try to encourage exactly that kind of interdisciplinary collaboration that I saw some of you write about in the chat box. And then third, and essential to our mission, is to encourage and to promote convergence research that is problem-focused, solutions-oriented, and deeply integrative in that it is interdisciplinary or even transdisciplinary in nature. So in order to achieve some of those mission areas, Converge for the first time has actually brought together the principal investigators for several National Science Foundation funded extreme events research and reconnaissance coordinating networks. And so these coordinating networks are for various disciplines, including geotechnical engineering, structural engineering, nearshore science, but also for social sciences. And I know several of you on this call have joined the SSHRC network, as well as for interdisciplinary science and engineering extreme events research. And so Converge helps to bring together those principal investigators so we can do more collaborative work, and also connects us to the free shared use facilities like the RAPID facility that has exactly the kind of equipment for loan that Jack Rozzolski wrote about in his chat box, as well as the cyber infrastructure that allows us to have an online data repository where we can actually publish our research instruments and our data. Converge is also home to the Social Science Extreme Events Research Network, which for all the social and behavioral scientists on the call, many of you have already joined this network. If you haven't joined yet, please sign up. We are 1,100 members strong to date, and the network continues to grow. And each month we update the Social Science Extreme Events Research map so that we can find one another and connect to social scientists both within country and also across countries. And then the last slide I'm going to share, and I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Tobin. So in addition to leading the Converge effort in 2017, I returned to the Natural Hazard Center as the 5th director in the center's long history. The Natural Hazard Center was founded in 1976 by the esteemed geographer Gilbert Fowler White. And the Natural Hazard Center was actually funded in response to the completion of the first assessment of natural hazards in the United States, which called for a national clearinghouse to connect researchers, practitioners, policymakers, and others concerned with reducing hazards and disaster losses. And so since 1976, the Natural Hazard Center has served as the National Science Foundation designated information clearinghouse for the societal dimensions of hazards and disasters. And we remain true to our founding mission of the center. And every single day we try to carry out our broader vision of working to ensure a just and equitable world where knowledge is applied to ensure that humans live in harmony with nature. And so to fulfill that vision, we really do 4 big things. So first, we work to translate and share information. So we have lots of free online publications and resources on the center's website. We also work to build connections across those various communities of research and practice. It's also central to our mission to advance new knowledge and to train and mentor a diverse next generation of hazards and disaster researchers and practitioners. And so to those last 2 mission areas, for 35 years, the center has funded a major small grants program that Jennifer is now going to talk about, which has helped us to bring that mission forward. So thank you everyone for listening. And Jennifer, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and turn it over to you. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you, Lori Peak. Let me go to my slides here, make sure everyone can see them. And then, okay. So, load. Okay. Can everyone see my slides?
They look great, Jennifer.
Okay, and so do you see them in full screen by any chance? Because just want to make sure.
Yeah, they are in full screen, Jen.
Oh, perfect. Oh, awesome. Okay. So hi, everyone. Like I said, my name is Jennifer Tobin, and I'm the Deputy Administrator of the Natural Hazard Center. And I'm going to talk to you today about 2 small grant programs that we have at the Natural Hazard Center. First, we have our longest standing program called the Quick Response Grant Program. And for over 35 years, we've been lucky to have the National Science Foundation generously provide funding to help us get researchers into the field quickly after a disaster. One of the requirements for receiving this funding is that researchers write a brief, approximately 10-page report on their preliminary findings from their fieldwork. And so over the years, we've helped researchers to publish over 250 reports, which are available on our website, which is listed there. Many of these scholars also go on to build on this work to publish peer-reviewed journal articles, books, and they also often receive larger grants from the National Science Foundation as a result of their quick response research efforts. These small grants typically range between $2,000 and $5,000 depending on the team and the project, and they're intended to assist researchers in quickly collecting perishable data following disasters and other extreme events. And so although we accept proposals on a rolling basis year-round usually, we do also put out special calls for events that result in higher than normal interest from disaster researchers. And so to get more information about this program and then to also be alerted when we open special calls and such, please do sign up for our small grants program communication@hazards.colorado.edu/sign up. And so real quickly, just these charts show the reports that we've published and the
Jen.
Yes.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but on my screen at least, it's still on your main slide. I don't know if others are seeing them.
Oh, okay. I'm switching slides. So
Sophie, is it still?
Yeah, it's still on the main slide.
Yeah.
Okay, so now is
there
it?
Goes. There was the next one.
Okay, so this is the slide that I was just talking about.
Okay.
Sorry.
Well, maybe stay in this format so we can see.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And I'm sure Sophie will share these slides with everybody. So all the links that we have embedded in here, you can get and go to our web pages as you want to.
Sounds great.
Okay. And then also, so the next slide here is just a graph that shows the National Science Foundation supported Natural Hazard Center grants since 1985. We funded hundreds of these over the years, like I said. And then also, this research focuses on a range of hazard types, including tornadoes, hurricanes, floods, earthquakes, wildfires, droughts, as you can see here. And sorry about the low resolution slides, but hopefully you can understand that they're categorized by earthquakes or different disaster types here. And then also, we also fund research on other events such as typhoons, landslides, oil spills, terrorism, and tsunamis. So a wide range of funded projects over the years. And that's obviously constantly changing as the world evolves. And now we have COVID and everything else. Okay. And then more recently, we have a new program. In addition to the Quick Response Grant Program that we started in 2019, the center received supplemental funding from the U.S. Federal Emergency Management Agency to launch a new small grants program called Mitigation Matters. And this program was born out of a desire to enable and support mitigation research in the same way that we've supported quick response post-event research over the decades. And so these are also small grants that range between $1,500 and $2,500 each. And at the Natural Hazard Center, we've released 2 special calls for the Mitigation Matters program, one in October of 2019 and one in March of 2020. And in total, we were able to fund 19 research studies, which you can read more about in our recently funded webpage. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about how these organizing frameworks for quick response research have kind of evolved over the years. So one, the primary key motivations for quick response research grants is to get researchers into the field quickly to collect what we call perishable data. And I'm sure many of you know that the term perishable data simply just means data that loses its value over time, or that it will no longer be available if it's collected quickly in the aftermath of a disaster. So some clear examples of perishable data include interviewing people while they're at evacuation shelters, getting the stories of exactly what had happened during the disaster before their memory starts to fade. And then from like an engineering perspective, it's really important to get damage assessments and information about debris and everything before it's cleaned up and before homes and businesses begin to get repaired. So a lot of quick response and reconnaissance research happens in that space as well. And for social scientists, we can see this definition being expanded over the years and applying over a longer period of time. And so, for example, if you're trying to document someone's displacement trajectory or their real-time experiences moving from place to place, it could be easily argued that this type of research is in fact perishable, but needs to be collected over the course of sometimes months and even years, versus just the immediate response phase that we typically think about when we think about perishable data. There's also been an expanded focus on conducting virtual response and reconnaissance over the years. This has been a longstanding practice of places such as the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute, and then more recently, the Structural Extreme Events Reconnaissance Network, who rapidly develop virtual response teams to gather data quickly through Google searches and other online databases. And they use this information to write preliminary reports of what's happening on the ground in that location for the express purpose of providing quick response field researchers with valuable information they need to know when entering the field. And this practice of virtual response should also be best practices for the rest of us, right? For social scientists, it's usually part of our research anyways, but we want to more formalize this process as well, because having baseline data and contextual data about a location before researchers arrive in the field not only improves the quality of research, but it also reduces the burden on community members. So you don't have to waste their time asking questions that you can easily find the answers to online. So we've also created a check sheet on virtual response, which Lori will talk about a little bit later. We have that on our website as well. And then just really quickly, I wanted to cover one of our special calls we recently did, which is also a good example of kind of evolving paradigms in field work. We recently released a special call for grant proposals to fund research that examines how COVID-19 is affecting potentially vulnerable or marginalized populations, healthcare workers and other frontline responders, various organizations and communities. And so 56 research proposals were submitted, and we were able to fund 18 of these projects. And they're all available on our website as well for you to read about. But this is also a perfect example about how these paradigms have expanded, because as many of these researchers had to get really creative with their research methods of how they're collecting data, given that travel restrictions are in place and social distancing and everything. So it's been really interesting to see how researchers have adapted to this new context. Okay, so now we would like to hear a little bit more from you. If you would, please use the chat box function again to answer the following questions that will help to guide our discussion that we have later today. So the first question is, if you have conducted quick response research, what is the one issue or lesson learned that has arisen in the context of preparing to conduct quick response research, which is the topic of this workshop here today? And if you've not conducted quick response research, what is the one issue that you are concerned about in terms of adequately preparing to respond? And so I'm going to give you about 60 seconds also to ask your question in the chat box. And then as I'll do that, we'll stop and I'll turn it over to Sophie Gabalt, who will be speaking about the ICLR Quick Response Grant Program. Okay, so I'm going to stop showing my screen right now. Feel free to continue to write in the chat box if you want, but I'll turn it over to you, Sophie.
Thank you very much, Paul, Lori, and Jennifer. This was great and very informative to start this off. I'm going to very briefly, I know we have some experienced quick researchers on the line and some that have never participated in the ICLR Quick Response Program as well. So I'm just going to quickly, can everyone see my full screen? And if I change slide, can you see it? Okay, great. That's good. So the ICLR Quick Response Program was created with a very strong help and support from the Natural Hazard Center, who have been in this working with this program for much longer than we have. But in 2015, they helped us to start our own Canadian version of the Quick Response Program, which is also designed to allow social, behavioral, and economic scientists to quickly deploy to disaster-affected areas in the aftermath. For ICLR, it's specific to extreme weather events or earthquake, because that's more around our mandate. Again, it's not an alternative to mainstream disaster research, but it's a way to really collect and integrate data that would be otherwise unavailable to researchers. And while the program started in 2015, we really started funding proposals in 2016, and the Fort McMurray wildfire was our main event that really launched the ICLR version of the Quick Response Project. And since then, we've funded 18 research projects from researchers across the country. And we're very proud that these 18 research projects really cover a whole lot of disciplines, a lot of hazards, from wildfires to tsunamis to flooding. And every year we see more people participating. That's been made possible with the help of very valuable partners, including SSHRC, who have been helping in sending our call for proposals over the year, and other universities as well that have disseminated them. So it's really great to see the growing number of researchers every time we launched a call, and to have more and more people reaching out to us outside of these calls for proposals, because similar to the Natural Hazard Center, we have an ongoing process, but we also probably once or twice a year launch a call for proposals for specific events. So some of you might remember, there's a few of you on the line that participated in an initial workshop that we held in 2017 with researchers that had participated to the Quick Response Program, as well as government representatives. And through this initial workshop, we had already started a brief discussion around what are some of the key objectives that we should have moving forward for the Quick Response program in Canada. And there's a couple things that came up, but two of the key things that were mentioned at the time or discussed, which was to invest in training for quick response researchers, which we did with Lori and Jennifer, and we are eager to continue to do. And another thing was to grow our Canadian community of quick response researchers. Again, our program has been around for 5 years. The Natural Hazard Center has been around for much longer. So it's really great to learn how their community has grown, and to finally, with the help of SSHRC right now, to have the opportunity to really invest more time and resources on this. So back in January, Paul, Lori, and Jennifer and myself, we submitted a proposal to SSHRC under the connection grants. And we are very lucky to have received funding for this. And our three main objectives through this program are to grow the community of scholars and graduate students that are conducting quick response research, to optimize the quality of quick response research and simultaneously reduce the risk of harmful impacts on communities, and finally to enhance the methodological rigor of scholarship in the field of hazards and disasters. So these are the three main goals that we're going after. Obviously, as Lori mentioned, our initial goal was to have, for those who are familiar with the Connection Grants, an in-person event, and then further worked from this initial workshop. We're not able to do this, which is why we transformed this project into a series of workshops. So this first workshop, as we mentioned, we're going to look at everything that goes into the planning, the before part of quick response research. Then on July 24th, we're going to have a similar format, and we're going to hear from you again to some of the things that went on during the research, that some of the lessons learned or things you wish you could share with other maybe new emerging scholars. And finally, on September 9th, we're going to learn on the after, how to write a report, how to disseminate your findings, how to make sure they're communicated widely, well disseminated. So if you can right now save these dates, we'd really appreciate it. I mean, this program is going to grow with your support, with the lessons that you've been able to learn. So the more we can learn from you, the better the program will be. And speaking of learning from you, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen, and I'm gonna we really want to hear from you. So I'm gonna move on to our first presenter today, Professor Jocelyn Stacy, which is with the School of Law at the University of British Columbia. She has conducted quick response research under the ICLR program, I believe in 2017, if I'm not mistaken. She can correct me if I'm wrong, but I'll let you go, and please tell us about what went into your project and some of the things that went into the planning as well of your quick response research. Thank you, Jocelyn.
Thanks so much, Sophie. So hello, everyone. I'm really new to this, and this is really great to be connected in this way. I've already learned a lot, and I'm looking forward to the conversations that follow. So thanks, Sophie, for inviting me to participate and present on my experience preparing quick response research. And this has been a really useful opportunity for me to reflect on what had happened during that, my initial experience doing quick response research, and kind of consolidate my thinking on this so far. I'm really grateful to the ICLR. If it had not been for a special call that went out, I don't think I would be doing this kind of research. And so, like I said, it's really great to be connected in this way. I'm in my office at UBC, working here for the first time in over 2 months. It's very exciting and novel to be back in my office. This also means I'm joining you from the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. I teach and research in the areas of environmental law, climate change law, public law, and emergency powers and the law, all from a Canadian legal perspective. But I'm very much a student of Musqueam law, which are, the original laws of this land that I live and work on, and that continue to this day. So I come at disaster research from a legal perspective. Seeking to understand how existing laws contribute to social vulnerability to disasters. I've worked for several years on wildfires in Western Canada, and it's interesting to hear, Sophie, that the Fort McMurray wildfire was sort of the launch of the quick response research program, because that's how I got into this too. I started off writing a paper on, well, what are all the laws that are implicated in this disaster? in the course since then, working on wildfires and working on disasters, I've worked closely with a First Nation doing this work. I'm still very much new to this, and I hope that what I have to say will be useful to those of you that are more experienced, or at least a launching point for a broader conversation. And I was completely new to this when I embarked on my first quick response research project. So what I thought I would do is just share a few reflections on some of the successes that I stumbled on when I was planning this project, and what I had wished I had known when I embarked on this. And I also thought I might contribute some specific insights into doing research collaboratively with Indigenous peoples from a settler perspective. But I suspect that many of these reflections are broadly applicable to doing community-based research more generally. I do have a slide prepared. One of the reasons I need, and I would like to connect with an interdisciplinary team, is that I need somebody to make me fancy slides like the ones I just saw this morning. But here's my very basic slide, and I'm gonna try to share my screen so that you can see it, because I've prepared some, I have prepared some takeaways. So let's see if this works. Okay, I gotta change my privacy settings apparently to do this. So let's see if we can do this quickly. You know what? Unfortunately, I can't do this because
Would
UBC...
you like me to share it for you?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind, Sophie,
Sure.
because UBC has changed all the, has a bunch of restrictions on how we can use Zoom. So if you wouldn't mind, Sophie, that would be great.
Yeah, and just let me know when I need to change. So
Well, there's only one, so if you can get it up.
okay.
Yeah,
Sounds good.
really simple, really simple. Law professor approach to this.
All right.
But,
Let me just find it
so
here.
while Sophie's putting that up on the screen, there's 3 takeaways I thought that come out of my reflections on this work. So one is to do your homework. The second is to ride shotgun or ride in the passenger seat. And the third is to have some patience. So let me give you a little bit of background to the project that I was working on. The questions that I was interested in researching were how different orders of government interact during wildfire response, so Canada, British Columbia, and Indigenous governments, whether those interactions supported or impeded the exercise of the inherent authority of Indigenous peoples to govern, and how those legal questions about intersecting authority contributed to First Nations vulnerability to wildfire disasters. So that was, at a general level, the questions that I was interested in. So, I was following the wildfires that were taking place in British Columbia. I knew there was conflict. It was widely publicized. I had just finished writing a paper on the role of law and disaster vulnerability, like I mentioned, on the Fort McMurray wildfire. And I was really eager to learn more about the situation that was unfolding. I don't think when most people are observing a disaster unfold, they're not thinking, look at all that law, right? Even lawyers, I don't think, are thinking, oh my goodness, look at all that law. But this was a situation where there were clear legal issues that were really jumping out of the headlines. So legal issues about who has the authority to decide in this case, and how do different authorities sort of get reconciled during a disaster response. But I didn't have any existing relationships with First Nations governments. So the first thing that I did was I did my homework. And so as a general rule, right, for settlers working with Indigenous peoples are not responsible for educating Canadians on our colonial past and present. We have a massive educational deficit in Canada when it comes to colonialism and Indigenous settler relations. But there are lots of publicly accessible resources that help remedy that educational deficit. So the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Most Indigenous nations in Canada have websites and publicly available information about who they are, how they govern, what their history is, their priorities. And so I came into this, with that kind of baseline understanding, much to the credit of the faculty that I work in that takes this very seriously. But that baseline of understanding, I think, needs to be coupled with some humility, right? And a willingness to learn about the specifics of the community that you're seeking to work with. So I thought I'd share a short anecdote from my work with this First Nation, which is, bordering between humility and ignorance, I think, but I think is illustrative of that line, right? And it's so and illustrative of the fact that it's okay to make mistakes, when you're embarking on this kind of research. So this was on, I think, my second field trip out to visit the communities that I was working with. A community member had picked me up from the airport, and we were driving out to one of the reserves, and we were just chatting about the governance of the First Nation. We were chatting about the territory and things like that. And I asked a question along the lines of, well, are your laws still being implemented, and what does that really look like? And I was coming at it from from a Canadian legal perspective, thinking about sort of very formal indicia of a legal system, like we have police officers that enforce the law, and sort of thinking, well, what's your equivalent of police officers? And the answer that I got was very kind and very patient. And she said to me, well, yeah, our laws around, being good hosts. So for example, if we know we have a guest coming, we wouldn't let them wander around on the territory by themselves. We might pick them up from the airport and drive them to where they're going, and kind of explain the landscape and explain about ourselves to our guests. And I thought, oh my goodness, I'm such an idiot, right? Like, trained in law, and here I am, I don't even see it when it's right in front of me. It was a question. It was a question that was a really an opening to a really good conversation, and a moment of real genuine learning on my part. But like I said, I think that's a question that charitably illustrates some humility, and less charitably illustrates some ignorance. So that's by way of doing my homework on this research. The second thing that I did was when I knew that I wanted to undertake this kind of research, I sought out support in the form of sort of formalized channels that we have at the University of British Columbia. So I reached out to the director of the First Nations House of Learning. I said, I have some resources, I have some expertise, I have a real interest, I want to do this kind of work in the right way. What do I need to know? And he was really generous. He met with me for about 30 minutes. We just sort of talked through what it meant, to be a settler who wants to do research with a community, right? Not about an Indigenous community, but with an Indigenous community. And he also put me in touch with a little upstart office at the university that has grown enormously since then, the Indigenous Research Support Initiative. And I met with the director there. We had a really detailed conversation about the work that I wanted to do. I suspect she was actually vetting me, even though it was a very warm conversation that we had. And at the end of it, she said, I'm actually in touch with a chief from a First Nation that's looking for support on this set of issues. And so she played a matchmaker role in connecting me with the community that was looking for the kind of expertise that I had. So admittedly, this seems like a bit of blind luck. But I don't think it is, right? Like, I could have started cold calling First Nations communities, and I didn't. And I recognize that not every university or not every researcher is going to have access to the initiatives that we have at UBC. But I think that it is important to seek out, existing relationships with your institution if they're there, right? So in hindsight, what I realized was that for somebody like me who was very new to this, it was extremely important that I was working with an Indigenous community that had experience already working with researchers. It just meant that they knew how to articulate their needs. They knew what, they were able to direct the research. They could answer my questions. Like, it just made everything go a lot more smoothly. So I think if you are able to seek out either formal or informal support mechanisms, wherever you're at, there's an opportunity to build on existing relationships that are already there with your institution, rather than having to start from scratch. One other dimension that I'll just add in terms of doing your homework, that first point there. For those of you in Canada, you'll know this, we're in a year where, before COVID-19, the news was dominated by cross-Canada blockades in support of the Wet'suwet'en people over a conflict with the Coastal GasLink pipeline in northern BC. So part of doing your research is to understand the sort of the political context that you're working within, right? Some Indigenous nations are very divided societies, like many are around the world. And so doing your research involves, you know, looking to whoever it is that you're proposing to work with to see if they, you know, to see if they have legitimacy, right, within the community that they are purporting to represent. You know, and this is not to give you a yes or no answer about how to proceed once you have that information, but really just to do your homework to understand, right, and to walk into that situation with your eyes as open as possible. The second takeaway point I have up here is to ride shotgun or ride in the passenger seat. So the projects that I've worked on have been Indigenous-led projects. Where the First Nations partner really has been in the driver's seat, and I was, you know, riding in the passenger seat, riding in the back seat. And this started right at the planning stage, right? Actually, I think it's especially important at the planning stage. And I think this is a really tricky shift for many researchers to make. So most disciplines, right, teach you how to be, or train you to be self-motivated and meticulous at planning and goal-oriented and all sorts of, you know, if you're within a university or want to be within a university, lots of institutional pressure to publish, you know, in traditional venues. And so over the course of this project, I spent a lot of time and mental energy sort of managing that compulsion that I've been trained to have around planning and taking a more go with the flow approach to this research project. But in order to be able to ride in the passenger seat, I think that first point in the blue box there is really crucial, right? To make sure that the goals that you have and the ability that you have and the skills that you have really align with the community partner. And so in my case, early conversations with the chief and some of the staff within the nation, you know, conversations where we were just getting acquainted with one another, it was clear that the questions that I was interested in and the questions that I had the training to help answer were generally the same questions that the nation was interested in pursuing. And so that then allowed me to be flexible, right? And to fit myself in, right, where the nation needed me most. And as it happened, the nation fit me in into a much bigger project, and we produced something so much broader and better than I could have ever imagined on my own. So it really worked out enormously well. So just a couple of thoughts on that. I mean, and I think Indigenous-led research is an essential end in itself, right? If we're committed to the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and you know, it's something that my university is committed to, this is the right way to do research. But there are some instrumental benefits to this. So one of which is the end product was just so much better than I could have imagined from my own sort of limited disciplinary perspective and my limited experience. But another is that this project sailed through ethics review and approval. It was clear that the nation was asking for this work. We had a research collaboration agreement in place. And so in the end, receiving ethics approval was no big deal. So the third point that I have up there is to have patience. I think this research project really pushed the boundaries of quick response research. So thanks to the ICLR for their patience in supporting me with this work. I think patience goes hand in hand with not being in the driver's seat. So that's an important part of doing Indigenous-led research, or being part of Indigenous-led research. We were able to get out, in terms of like what the quick response part of this, it was really crucial that I was in touch with this First Nation you know, as soon as possible, so that we could start that relationship building, right? If we were measuring this project by the timing of when I actually went into the field to help out with interviewing, I don't think that this would fit within the boundaries of quick response research. It worked out because we were out there interviewing emergency managers and wildfire teams right as they were preparing for the next wildfire season. But this project wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been in touch with the nation right in that emergency response initially, so that we could start building that relationship. Another piece of having patience is that, you know, I'm optimistic that the nation's going to be interested in having some academic work published on the project that I was involved in, but it's likely still a few years away, right? So I know that I have to have patience when it comes to that. And it's also, I think, not quick research in the sense that, you know, at the outset of the sort of the planning stage and getting to know the First Nation, it was quite clear that doing this research the right way meant that this was going to be a long-term relationship with this First Nation. It was not, I couldn't be sort of parachuted in to do this one project and then leave, that's not how you do this kind of research well. And so you know, what started off for me as a really interesting but kind of abstract legal question has resulted in, you know, a long-term relationship that has evolved and expanded, and that's been really positive for me and mutually beneficial, I think, but also not something that I expected as I was embarking on this. I hope that that's enough to sort of get a conversation started a little bit later. And so thanks for the opportunity to present those thoughts.
Thank you so much, Jocelyn. This was really helpful, and to start with your perspective and to see what quick response meant to you and some of the challenges that you faced. That was really good. And we're going to move on to the two other presentations, but I think there's a lot of points that we're going to come back to when we have our discussion after. So with that, I'll pass it to Professors Aida Mamouji and Jack Rozzolski from York University, who are fairly experienced in the Canadian setting of the Quick Response Program because they've conducted 2 different projects with us. So we're really excited to hear from your perspective as well.
Thank you. Dr. Mamouji, do you have any opening comments you'd like to make before we begin?
No, just thanks for the opportunity, and you can start us off, Jack.
Okay, thank you. Sophie, I'm going to attempt to share a screen for this presentation right now.
It's great. We can see your screen, Jack.
Okay, so I'm going to start a slideshow. Oh, okay, for this afternoon's presentation of about 15 minutes, myself and Dr. Mamouji will provide a short introduction, and then we're going to attempt to address 3 questions posed from the moderator. I'll speak for about 9 minutes or so, and then Dr. Mamouji will conclude with addressing the final 2 of the 3 questions. But before I begin, I'd like to just, my thoughts go out to my colleagues in the United States who are dealing with the difficult circumstances of COVID-19 combined with the civil unrest taking place in many cities. And my thoughts go out to everybody there in that difficult circumstances. Second, I'd like to say that I'm very much interested in contributing to the continued development of quick response research in Canada, and I look forward to being a part of the community. And then third, I'd like to suggest that I have somewhat of a unique background in these matters, and that I've participated in both in quick response research, both in Canada and in the United States. Now you should see a second slide that has appeared. Is that correct? Okay, on my second slide right now, what I'm representing here is some of my background in quick response research. My first quick response research took place about 21 years ago when I was working on my dissertation related to volcanic hazards in the Eastern Caribbean. In 2012, I was fortunate to be funded to do some quick response research looking at improvisations of emergency operation centers due to a tornado disaster in southern Illinois. Both those projects took place on an individual basis. In 2014, I participated in a team-based quick response project looking at the response of a high school football team to recovery from an EF4 tornado disaster in the Midwestern United States. Recently, myself and Dr. Mamouji have formed a quick response research team at York University, where we've engaged in a variety of projects over the past few years. Those projects include a project in 2017 based in British Columbia out of the city of Kamloops as related to wildfire evacuation considerations. About 1 year ago at this time, myself and Dr. Umaji also engaged in another quick response research project related to a flood disaster taking place in Ontario's Cottage Country and issues of social vulnerability and disability inclusive disaster management during those flooding events approximately 1 year ago. More recently, myself and Dr. Umaji are engaged in a project which Dr. Umaji is leading, which is a rapid research funding based on COVID-19, looking at destigmatizing Chinese communities in the face of COVID-19. And many of the principles myself and Dr. Umaji have developed in their other quick response research had applied directly to, I think, our success in gaining this larger grant through the Canadian Institute of Health Research to look at some of the factors surrounding COVID-19 social countermeasures. Now I'm going to provide some comments on the first two questions posed by the moderator, and as a preface to those comments, I have just a few images of myself engaged in quick response field research, and I would say that's one thing I really miss right now in this period, the inability of us to gather in person to hold this meeting, or the inability of anyone to actually enter into the field to do research, where most research right now consists of situations which are similar to what we're doing right now. Things like testing out a cot at an emergency center, seeing signs taped to a wall, or trying to organize things from the driver's seat of an automobile. We just don't have those types of experiences under COVID-19. And I'd like to follow up on one point Dr. Stacy has made about riding shotgun, which I think is very important. Dr. Stacy mentioned riding shotgun from a figurative perspective, but I would like to also bring that up from a literal perspective. When I am able to work with Dr. Umaji as a team in quick response research, that allows, the way it usually has worked out by happenstance, I would usually be the person driving the vehicle, and that would allow then Dr. Umaji to be in the passenger seat. And I would say by having Dr. Umaji in the passenger seat, she is able to gather perishable data to help to organize things, making, and one of the things I've learned is that quick response research is much more effective as a team than as a singular person. I've done it both ways, and it can be done as a singular researcher, but you can see from the scene in the middle how many balls you're juggling in the air to engage in quick response research. And it's much easier to have someone to work with together in the field as a team to accomplish research goals. Now, to address the question, what went into the planning of the research? From my perspective, I think first, the big decision of the initial go or no-go decision regarding engaging in research, because once you make that decision to go, there's an inherent impending rush, meaning that you have to consider what do you have going on in your life for the next month and a half. And can everything going on in your life during the next month and a half get put on hold when you engage in entering into the field into a rapid manner? And there's a lot of implications that have to be made regarding your own personal situation, regarding whether you have the ability to enter into the field quickly or not, because I find entering into the field quickly is all consuming. Also, decisions on the appropriate time to enter the field. What I mean by appropriate time is appropriate time from many different perspectives. For example, if a disaster occurs requiring quick response research at the beginning or end of a term, where I'm teaching 3 classes, even though the perishable data time might be appropriate to enter the field, in terms of my teaching or other incumbent university duties, it may be impossible to enter the field. So balancing the appropriate time from both the field perspective and the individual's researcher's perspective is important to get those 2 things to coincide. Then also in terms of planning, there is back office work, for example, dealing with the contracts and grants bureaucracy, the institutional review boards, the research ethics clearance. Dr. Mumaji will talk more about that in terms of how pre-existing relationships are important, but there are a number of tasks that need to be accomplished from the back office perspective. Simultaneously, the field forward perspective of the work is important, meaning making the contact with the study subjects in the field in terms of recruitment, learning about the basic logistics from the place to be studied, the appropriate and proper background on entering into the field, all the way to the point of highway maps, airports, hotels, gas stations, getting some type of field logistics in place. It's a lot of work for one person. So what myself and Dr. Mumaji have found through the team approach, one of us would usually take the approach of the back office work. The other one would take the approach taking the field forward work. We would work simultaneously to enter the field. And I think taking the team approach was very useful to help accomplish the task at hand. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Mumaji.
Thank you so much, Professor Rozzolski. So first of all, I want to reiterate what Jack has mentioned. We really do sincerely thank ICLR for the great opportunity that you have afforded to us, and myself as a my first project working on quick response was also very early in my academic career, and definitely launched me in a trajectory that I'm grateful for. You can go to the next slide, Jack. So we were asked to answer 2 questions. I'll answer this one. What are some tools that can assist in ahead of going out into the field, ahead of developing your proposal? And one thing that worked really well for us is the fact that I'm going to skip to the middle bullet here, but really having that relationship with our ethics board at the university ahead of our initial ICLR grant that we put in. So what we had done is Professor Rozzolski and myself thought, we're in this field, we're going to be wanting to do research. There's no active emergency or event right now, but let us use this lull as an opportunity to introduce ourselves to our ethics board and tell them about the potential research projects that we would be engaged in and the quick turnaround that we would need for them ahead of a disaster. And so we did that, and then came the wildfires in British Columbia in 2017 that we ended up using as our first site case. So the fact that we had already established that relationship with the ethics board really improved the time frame in which we could get into the field. And I highly encourage everybody who wants to do this type of research to just establish those relationships and tell them that there's nothing right now. I don't have anything. We even had discussed the idea of developing a draft application that didn't really have the event outlined because we can't predict the future, but we had all the information that we would need ready to go out to the ethics board, just fill in the pertinent details that would be necessary. In terms of some tools that we thought about would help us in the future would be letters of introduction about the type of research that we're doing. So what is quick response research? The fact that once we get an approval, once our grant is successful, it would be really helpful to have a formal letter on letterhead that we could then use with our, especially when we were trying to get into the field. So, you know, when you're trying to speak to, especially officials, asking for meetings or interview times, we would go and explain, you know, we've just been recently funded by ICLR and you know, provide that introduction, but it would just help to have something formally written that we could just share with our interlocutors on the ground. I'm really looking forward to the discussion, I guess, later on, where Professor Peak and Jennifer Tobin will be talking about the extreme events research check sheets, because I think that's basically where you guys are going to be talking about, probably. But, you know, when you're in the rush and you're trying to get onto the field really quickly, sometimes you have, like, you know, less than 2 weeks and you want to get onto the ground. Having those checklists for basic equipment that you'd need, especially for qualitative field research, would be very helpful. I think also, when you're in the field and you are, you know, it's like a storm. Like, you go in and there's, you know, sleepless nights and day after day, and you're on the run. There's the back end once you come back and you have to, you know, put everything together to, you know, close up your application. And I think funding and receipts and all that you have to, you know, keep track of can get really cumbersome. And so we were thinking that, you know, one thing that could help us is to actually have some kind of a way in which, you know, we don't need to, you know, like maybe an application or like an app, a phone app or something that could really facilitate the collection of those receipts to keep track of things. So when we're there, you know, you get to your hotel, you have the receipt, take a picture of it, and then you're done. But then, you know, having to keep track of that, and then your meals or your resources, whatever, it just becomes really complicated. So we thought it would be helpful if there's a way in which to keep a electronic repository of receipts, and then that those electronic receipts would be all that would be needed when closing up your application. But we did want to say that one thing that's really been helpful with our experience with ICLR is the fact that the institution is very flexible. And I think flexibility is so important, even when it comes to the submission of a grant proposal. The outline, like the structure, is pretty much left up to the researchers. And I think that's very helpful because of the nature of different types of projects. So that flexibility is definitely appreciated. Next slide. Okay, the next question is around, you know, how can you encourage, you know, emerging researchers with the, you know, encouraging them to do quick response research. And we were thinking about what are some things that would be useful in our setting as disaster and emergency management professors that have a department with an active graduate program and an undergraduate program. And we think just having, you know, a presentation on what is quick response research. And, you know, I guess when we were thinking about this, if it wasn't in, you know, during a time of physical distancing, it would be great to be able to invite somebody from ICLR to come in as a guest lecturer. But even if it's just like a presentation that we could offer to our students, you know, quick response research 101, that would be really helpful. And I think also having websites that explain the concept, I think Converge has done a really great job, and having an equivalent here in the Canadian side where, you know, what is it, how do you do it, how do you go about it, I think it would be great. One thing that I think not only is it for students, but also for any of us, really having more detailed discussions on ethics and questions around when is the appropriate time of going into the field. I think I know that was highlighted as one of the objectives earlier presented by Lori, but I think that there just needs to be a lot more there. There's a lot of second guessing that we go through, even when we're submitting our applications. I think having a repository of equipment would also be really useful. So, you know, you're gonna need audio recorders, you're gonna need, you know, cameras, a way in which if you're doing surveys to, you know, iPads or something like that. I think if there was equipment that would be available for loan, that would really help emerging researchers go into the field. And then I guess initiatives like this where you're doing activities to raise awareness about quick response research. And I think, you know, we've been able to really get the academics involved, but I think if we're able to somehow include our students in these conversations, that's when we're going to see quick response research grow in Canada. Thank you so much.
And Then with that, I'm going to thank you, Dr. Momaji. With that, I believe I stopped sharing the screen, and I'd like to second say in conclusion, Dr. Momaji was very correct in saying when you engage in quick response field research, and every time I've engaged in quick response field research, it's always like a storm when you enter the field. Everything's happening at once. Interview times are changing, roads are closed, hotel accommodations change, conditions change in the field, and being able to operate in that type of dynamic environment of the storm, I think, is an important prerequisite for anyone considering quick response research. And then in conclusion, I would just like to second Dr. Momaji and express appreciation to both the Institute for Catastrophic Loss Reduction and the Natural Hazards Center out of University of Colorado Boulder for continuing to sponsor these quick response initiatives. I've found them very important in my career, and I'm very appreciative of that type of support for the community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professors Mamouji and Rozzolski. We really appreciate your input. I think some very valuable things for us to write down, also to discuss in just a little bit. So thank you so much for that. Because I'm trying to continue so we can move on to the discussion. Next up, we'll hear from Dr. Brent Doberstein at the University of Waterloo, who has also conducted 2 different quick response research projects under the ICLR program.
Okay, thanks very much, Sophie. I'm going to try and share my screen. It seems like we're having success now, so let's hope that continues. Okay, so hopefully everybody can see what I'm seeing. So as Sophie mentioned, I'm going to be profiling briefly 2 projects that I've been involved in under the Quick Response Research Program. So I'm just starting out with one of those projects and a photo from Point Gatineau, basically about 13 months ago last year. And this was Point Gatineau, which was experiencing flooding from the Ottawa River. Even before I applied for the Quick Response Program, as soon as I heard that the flood peak was happening on the Ottawa River around, it was a bit unclear, April 30th, May 1st, May 2nd, I decided to put my kayak on top of my SUV and drive to Ottawa to get some firsthand experience. And at that point, I was just thinking about teaching resources for my 3rd year class on human dimensions of natural hazards. I also didn't know if I would be allowed access into a flood zone on a kayak. So I was very careful to watch what everybody else was doing, to get a sense from police whether it was okay to cross barriers, etc. And that actually seemed to be fine. There were people going in and out of the flood zone, mostly homeowners, some by boat, and me taking pictures. So this was the first of 2 projects, government-sponsored home buyout programs and post-flood decisions to retreat, case studies of Constance Bay, Ontario, and Point Gatineau, Quebec. And this project was really focusing on the concept of managed retreat, the intentional retreat from risk zones of housing and sometimes infrastructure. The second project I was involved in as a co-investigator with Dr. Jennifer Spinney as the PI. The title of that project is How Disaster Feels, the Cascading Effects of Time and Experience on Perceptions of Risk, Response, and Recovery to Flooding in Whitewater Region Township. So Dr. Spinney contacted me about 10 days after the slide that you just saw in the kayak, and asked me if I wanted to go in on this research. And the first thing I did is I looked up Whitewater Region Township. I had no idea where that was. So I was schooled that day. So these are the 2 projects, the second of which is identified with the red star, the project that I started with, Constance Bay and Point Gatineau, with the yellow stars. And of course, all related to flooding on the Ottawa River last year. So one of the first challenges of quick response research is mobilizing your team. in a short period of time. So basically, as I was driving back from Point Gatineau, I was beginning to formulate a kind of a grant proposal in my brain. And that was even before the ICLR Quick Response Program was announced. So it was very, very good time spent, but of course, I also needed some student involvement in that project. So after I found out about success in the Quick Response program, I contacted 2 students, an honors undergrad student that had expressed interest in hazards research, and then a master's student who had gone down a different path that was becoming more and more frustrating, unsuccessful. She was trying to do international research. And so I basically said, Shiree, we have a possibility now. What do you think? Are you interested? And within a space of 5 weeks, we had our research team for the Constance Bay project. The other project was a little easier in terms of the team mobilization. Jennifer and myself were the team, so that was quite easy to mobilize. So the main questions for the 2 projects, for the managed retreat project, to what extent and in what way are government-sponsored managed retreat, otherwise called buyout policies, to what extent are they affecting 2019 flood victims' decisions to retreat from flood risk? So are government-sponsored programs important in that retreat decision? For the second project, basically the question was the effects of time and experience on residential and public stakeholders, flood risk perception, responses, and recovery. And I should mention that the PI for that second project, Dr. Spinney, is an anthropologist by training, and so she brings an anthropological approach and perspective to that research. So coming back to the managed retreat project, the very first thing that I found out is the importance of provincial boundaries. And what I found is on one side of the Ottawa River, on the Ontario side, there was no government buyout program, a formal program to buy out flooded homeowners, compensate, and allow them to move out of flood risk. Right across the river, 100 meters, maybe 200 at the widest spot, there was a very well-defined Quebec government buyout program that allowed for up to $200,000 in compensation for homes and another $50,000 for land value. And the basic decision for homeowners is, are we going to rebuild in place, maybe taking insurance money, or are we going to take a buyout and move to another location? So that's the basics of the research project itself. So the first question, what went into the planning of field research? And I'm sticking with the stars to kind of guide you through this. For the first research project in Point Gatineau and Constance Bay, the initial field visits turned or became extremely important, especially with relation to the time-sensitive nature of post-disaster data. So I personally went during peak flood and spent a couple of hours over 2 days in Point Gatineau in a reconnaissance trip. And then once the student team was mobilized, I took the students to the field, even before we had ethics clearance, to do aspects of the research that did not involve ethical considerations. So we weren't interviewing people. We were looking at the community. We were walking in the community. We were taking pictures. And it was astounding how important those initial reconnaissance visits were, both in framing my own thinking about the research and for the students thinking about their thesis research. That post-flood trip with the 2 students lasted 36 hours total, and again was super important. So the other part of planning for field research is trying to map out, and this is, I think, as Jack had mentioned, trying to map out a timeline or the research window that everybody is available. It's during a non-teaching term for me personally, and students, if they're co-op students, they're not doing work, maybe a weekend. So trying to come up with that research window. And then for the other project with Dr. Spinney, she had teaching commitments, I had teaching commitments throughout the year. So we were juggling our various commitments and trying to come up with a window that worked for the research. The ethics review, which I think most people have mentioned in comments already, was a challenge. the University of Waterloo ethics review system has changed significantly. I would say, as a user of that system, has changed significantly in the last 2 years, and it's become a longer process. So it took us from start to finish 2 months to get each of those projects through the ethics process. The other very time-consuming part of the field research, a lot of the planning was involved in firstly identifying key informants for the 2 projects, and then tracking down, coordinating, conducting interviews, sometimes in person, sometimes over a virtual platform. For the second research project, part of the planning that was more or less thrust on us was needing to find a gatekeeper in that community that could support the research and basically unlock access to potential key informants. I would say there was initially interest in the research, but not a lot of buy-in until somebody from the community took an active interest in that and actually offered in some cases to facilitate the research. And then things went much more smoothly. So identifying that gatekeeper, as has been mentioned by other presenters, extremely important in one of the 2 research projects. What are some of the tools that could have assisted us to better prepare? Certainly a list of key contacts or organizations involved in the various phases of the flood response, and those key organizations change very rapidly. So you have initial relief agencies involved, and they may be involved for only 2 to 4 weeks. And then you move into the recovery mode. You move into insurance agencies trying to do assessments of damage and deciding if they're going to compensate or not. In the case of the Quebec Point Gatineau flood disaster, the assessment for the Quebec government compensation program. And then even further months down the road, other agencies are moving in. The initial agencies have stopped work. So it was a challenge coming up with and identifying the right organizations to interview. As a couple of people have already mentioned, it would have been useful to have some ethics tools and training modules available, broadly related to data collection in the time of disaster. And I think this is really important for students. Maybe not so much for professors and researchers who've been involved in this research for a few years now. Tip sheets, sensitivity training, cultural training, any of those resources would be very much appreciated by a certain subset of researchers. Tools and training specifically regarding female researchers and safety in the field. In the case of maybe a sole PI project where the PI is female going into a disaster zone, we had discussions as a collective, and some of the female researchers identified that specific tool as being important for them personally. Just not knowing what to watch for and some of the preliminary thoughts that should go into field research in a disaster zone. And then more generally, tools and training for community-based collaboration. And again, probably a little more important for students. How can we best assist new and emerging researchers, including grad students, as they prepare their field research? So some of this has been mentioned in the tools section, a hazards research tip sheet. Before you enter a disaster zone, consider blank. And I should also point out that another element of preparing to go into a post-disaster setting is, at my university anyway, carrying out a risk management and safety form application. So, how do you know the risks that you're going to confront if you haven't been to that community during the disaster? So that tip sheet would be useful. There's a couple of photos up here. Hopefully everybody's seeing them. Just trying to indicate the time sensitivity of data. So I happened to take pictures of the same house with the same recycling bin on the front doorstep about 7 weeks apart. Obviously on May 2nd, that house, there's a for sale sign in the front yard. I don't think there were too many people coming in for open houses. And 7 weeks later, there's very little evidence that that house might have had some flood damage. So obviously, time sensitivity is part of a hazards research tip sheet. maybe some guidance about invisible damages. You know, we're all very sensitive to seeing visible damages. We take photos, but many of the damages in a disaster zone are invisible. Trauma, mental health, etc. And then I think ICLR could and has facilitated research connections. So just building out a database of other organizations that would be relatively easy to reach out to for research or a communication portal. I think I'm going to run out of time here, so I'm just going to very quickly put up some of my results from the two projects. I would say that the main result from the Constance Bay Point Gatineau case is that government programs are absolutely critical for managed retreat. So in the case of Point Gatineau, 185 homeowners to date have already taken compensation for buyouts and have moved, and many of those homes are already demolished. In Constance Bay, virtually nobody has, well, certainly I would say nobody has demolished their house and left. Some homeowners have rebuilt using insurance compensation, and those houses are now on the market. So you can see a picture here. I just looked up yesterday. This is a house that was for sale right next to the Lighthouse restaurant that was flooded in 2019. The other part of the research results, many people spoke about the bureaucracy of compensation for managed retreat. What our findings are, wherever possible, don't create a second disaster through bureaucracy. I'm going to skip to this other research project here, the second research project, where because of our timelines and inability to coordinate during the teaching term, we ended up doing flood research in the middle of a major blizzard. So some of the findings from that project that Dr. Spinney has recorded or reported to me, there's a very wide range of experiences. So she spoke to individuals who were mostly affected through tangible damages, flooded properties, and some who were intangibly impacted, stress, mental health, anxiety, etc. And a very wide range of experiences, ranging from people who were unable to leave their house or get to their house because roads were flooded, but not the house itself, to some people who were completely flooded out and lost everything. She also found some people were eligible for compensation and others weren't. And in some cases, the dividing line between yes, I'm eligible and no, I'm not is razor thin. And she found that. And as I've mentioned, very high levels of anxiety, stress, and always now looking forward to the next flood season and waiting. Is it going to be a normal year? Is it going to be a flood year? The last thing I wanted to mention basically as a major thank you to the ICLR is just some of the leverage and some of the outputs that came out of two Quick Response Program grants and another University of Waterloo grant that I was able to leverage from the Quick Response grants. So basically, one honors undergraduate thesis, now graduated and interviewing for an NRCan science analyst position, fingers crossed. Another master's thesis student is racing to finish before she starts the PhD program in September. The ICLR research opportunity allowed her to make that timeline, we're hoping. Another master's thesis student is hoping to do BC field research, but that's COVID-19 dependent. And the PI for the second project, Dr. Spinney, as a postdoc, is hoping to get several publications and is currently interviewing for faculty positions. I was thrilled to be supporting students and have also connected to some other work and publications. So that's basically everything that I had, and that was my way of thanking ICLR's Quick Response Program.
All right.
So I think I can stop screen sharing.
Yeah, I think it's on the top. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much to all of our four presenters. There's so much good material there. I'm not even sure where to start, but just to launch this this discussion, we heard so many good points, in my opinion. I'm sure Paul, Laurie, and Jennifer will agree. We heard about how quick response, the timeline might mean different things for different people. The importance of establishing relationships at the beginning, both at the research team level with the host community, with your research ethics board, We heard also about identifying the right timeline that works for you, that works for getting the perishable data that you need. So I'm just very interested in hearing everyone's thoughts based on what we heard. If I can, I think it would help if you could raise your hand. I believe there's a little icon to raise your hand in the participants box, if I'm not mistaken. So if anyone wants to get started or has any comments, Lori, I saw you unmuted yourself, so I don't know if, oh, no longer unmuted. That's good. Let me see. Anyone would like to get going?
Maybe I can go if nobody else has a burning question.
That sounds great.
I'm wondering how the Rapid Response Program at Colorado Natural Hazards Center has dealt with the issue of ethics, because I think I recall that researchers are basically pre-approved even before disasters happen. I may have gotten that wrong, but how has the research experience has been with ethics review at your center?
Jen, I can answer that in the past, and then if you'd answer now. So Brent, that is a great question. I wanted to echo Sophie. Those presentations were fantastic and so thoughtful. So thank you for that. And Brent, to your very specific question, over the 35-year history of the Natural Hazard Center's Quick Response Program, the ethics as well as pre-approval of applications has been handled differently over time. Okay. So there for a period, like when Jack received his first grant in 1999, there was sort of a block of time where the center used to require they would have 1 to 2 application deadlines per year, and they would require researchers to do exactly what Ida and Jack were talking about, to essentially sort of presuppose what a disaster might be, to write a quick response application to get IRB approval. And then should an event happen that was met the criteria for the application, then the Natural Hazard Center would activate the grant. Mm-hmm. So for example, Jack would have written an application on, if a tornado happens in a rural area that affects this population group, I'd like to deploy. Then if that, not that anybody was ever hoping for that event to happen, but if that event did happen, then Jack could contact the Natural Hazard Center, and the Natural Hazard Center would then approve they would have already pre-approved his approval or his proposal, but then could activate it. So that's how we used to do it in the past. But then more recently, the center has led to this open call for proposals where whenever an event happens, you can submit, or we sometimes have special calls, as Jennifer talked about. So then Jen, I'll turn it over to you to talk about the language that we now have for how IRB and ethics approval is attached to the current proposals. Thank you, Brent, and thanks, Jen.
Thank you.
Okay, so currently how it works is people can submit a proposal at any time to the Natural Hazard Center for a quick response grant, and it is post-event now. So we're no longer. Oh, I see a hand raised. Christine, did you have a question?
That's for after. Thanks.
Before I go on,
Jen, do you want to go ahead and finish what you were saying? Yeah.
Okay, I just saw her raise her hand, so I wasn't sure if she wanted to interject. So now post-event, you can submit a proposal to the Quick Response Grant Program, and that's separate from your IRB. We do fund, given that we have National Science Foundation funded projects, we do have to fund PIs that are at US-based universities with this funding. And so we put it, the IRB component of it is that before collecting data, they do have to receive IRB approval from their institution, but it's on the institution that researcher is based at. We don't offer the IRB or ethics approval. We do a lot of training, and we have a lot of resources Lori is going to talk about later about getting IRB approval and such, and best practices for that. But currently you can submit a proposal, your proposal can be accepted, but you're not allowed to actually begin collecting data until you do receive and then submit to us a letter from your IRB saying that you've been approved.
Lori and Jennifer, someone asked in the chat box if you could speak to why did you make that change to pre-proposal to post-event? proposed?
Yeah, hi, Eric. That is a great question. And, you know, some of it has just had to do with, honestly, the investment of researcher time, because researchers every year, they'd write these fantastic proposals, and then the center would go through all of this work to review those sort of, we'll just call them pre-proposals. And so the center was doing a lot of work to review the proposals. Researchers were doing so much work to write the proposals. But then in the end, a lot of times people would be pre-approved, but then an event of sufficient magnitude or the type of event that people were wanting to study wouldn't happen in the course of the year. So then they'd have to go through that process again. So it just, we really liked it sort of came up in the conversation today, which is it gave researchers that time to think about what they wanted to do. What is the question? What is my topic? What would I do if this event happened? And so that was definitely the benefit of the quote unquote old model. But then in the end, I think that the cost of just having researchers and having the center team do all that review that sometimes didn't culminate in actual research, that was really the reason for the shift. But we try to maintain sort of the positives of both models as much as possible. But that's why I sort of shared what we did in the past, because some of the funders that we work with have actually talked about moving back to that old model because of what happens after a disaster, that just sort of everybody comes in, whether they have experience or not, and they just sort of are oftentimes proposing lots of different things. And so there has been some conversation about, do we need to go back to that pre-approval model to try to encourage that kind of longer term forethought and so forth. But I think, as with most things in life, there's not a right or a wrong answer, but we try to consider what are the best elements of the different approaches. So thank you, Eric.
Thanks for the context, Laurie.
Thanks, Laurie.
Oh, and I'd just like to add something to what Dr. Peak said. I apologize, Sophie, but I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand on the screen, but it's just 30 seconds. I was in the situation where I've actually anticipated, I think it was 8 disasters that would have potentially occurred. And I received, I think, quick response funding for 2. And that means 6 proposals where the disaster never happened. And I don't feel bad, because no one ever wishes a disaster to happen to a community. That's not our point. But at the same time, I think it's a much different approach when you presuppose a disaster that may happen. I was forced to do a lot more upfront research and think through my proposal, I think, slightly better. But then it's like rolling the dice, and it's kind of puts you in a strange personal ethical situation, hoping disasters are going to happen in places to further your research and your projects. So I guess there's pros and cons to both ways, but it's the other way, the way Dr. Peak previously mentioned was a very different way of doing things. It can be done that way, but it kind of feels like it puts researchers in a lottery, for a lack of a better term, which is kind of strange, but I can understand why that approach was taken. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. I think we have also Paul that want to mention something, and then Jeremy and Christine too.
Yeah, the only part I wanted to add was since ICLR announced the program at the CRHNet annual get-together, we've modified the program too. And in particular, Sophie mentioned that we brought a number of people together. Tara McGee, Laurie Pierce, and a number of others were part of that conversation. And we heard from those who participated that the way we initially launched the program was too rigid, and that we focused initially on supporting travel, and we had a fairly narrow definition of what we meant by quick response. And that there were quite a few people who were looking to try to get on with some work, and they liked the spirit of what we were doing, but the specifics weren't flexible enough. So I was really pleased today in some of the presentations, people talked about that we're showing more flexibility, and that's a good thing, because that was our intention. That's what we heard, and that's what we've been trying to do. The other part of what came out of that first assessment of how we were starting this effort in Canada we spent some time up with SSHRC. And we don't have the money to ever pretend to be an alternative to the funding sources that are available to our community. But SSHRC made it clear, quick is not a word they use. They don't understand that as something that they ever intend to do. And for those of us who need to get somewhere fast, SSHRC doesn't intend to do that. And so we're looking for trying to help this community understand and tell us what the gaps are so you can get out there and get the perishable data, get the information. Like later on, once you've got whatever you need to go get quickly, SSHRC will be there, right? I mean, there's a lot of different funding agencies, not only the well-known ones in Ottawa, but some of the provincial agencies, whatever, who want to support the kind of work we're talking about here. But they're not necessarily nimble and trying to go quickly. And so we're trying to fill that gap. Anyway, the last thing I want to throw out for conversation. So as Sophie and I are trying to get this going and build this and move us forward, we are looking for direction from you, and we're trying to show that we're listening and acting upon what you tell us. One of the thoughts is that we may need to go back to some of the things that were brought forward by the Natural Hazard Center in the United States that don't apply anymore in the US, but might still be needed here in Canada. So one that was on my mind was this pre-approval idea might be something that we bring. Whatever is right in the US might be different in Canada, but we need to discuss that and do it together. For example, we've got 20 years of experience where we've been supporting the science community and the engineering community to do quick response. So they've got all the blessing and approval. There's a tornado team. The government call us, and we send the engineers out. We sit with Environment Canada. So was that a magnitude 3 or a magnitude 2 tornado or whatever? And so we work with Greg Kopp and the engineers. We get called, and there's no waiting for approval and whatever. I mean, you get invited behind the police lines and you get to look at all kinds of stuff. And those communities in Canada, and Laurie and Jennifer can tell you more about the US conversation, those science communities, those engineering communities are starting to say, where are the social scientists? I mean, where's the rest of the research, right? We sent a team into Fort McMurray when the community was evacuated, when no one was allowed in to their own homes in Fort McMurray. We had a researcher going from house to house documenting the damage, but not a social scientist. This was and he wrote up the work, and it's been very, very useful work. But while we have connections in not every area, but several different hazards to send the scientists in, and the scientists want to bring the social scientists along, should we go back to, here are some pre-approved people because of where they're located or because they know the hazard? Like, what would that look like, right? Who we would immediately call when something occurs. Here's the flood, here's the wildfire, who should go in this case? And is the right way for the next 5 years or something to have pre-approved teams or people or whatever? I'm asking, we don't know the answer. And Laurie was sharing that while they went down that path and then stopped doing that, of asking people to apply in advance and whatever, maybe that is the way we want to go for a little while here in Canada, but we're leaving that open for conversation. So Sophie, anyway, I just wanted to add, we've changed as well. Even over a relatively short period of time, we've changed the program, and we want to keep showing that we listen to you. I saw lots of very useful, specific advice. We want to build that into the program. We want to be flexible. We want to help you move this forward. And so that's what this conversation is about. And we are openly having this conversation about what's the best way to do that. And we want to make sure that it helps you. We're not going to be a place with the kind of large funding that comes from others. But as Brent was sharing, if we open a door that lets you to get to other things, that feels really good to us. That's wonderful. And so that is a big step forward. Hey, back to you, Sophie. Thank you.
Well, and real quick, can I jump in too? Just to answer Brent's question really quick too about the IRB. We do have an example if you want to hear more about it in a project Lori and I were on where we did get through Colorado State University pre-approval from our IRB with a draft of a longer 5-year study where we had potential, cases that we were going to go to in this study, and we were able to hash out basically the whole entire plan, just waiting for the disaster to happen. And so that was really effective. And they even promised when they gave us approval that they would then turn around that the amendment each time there was a disaster that would happen. We would have to amend that IRB application and say, this is who we're going to speak to exactly, this is the location, all the details. And then they were able to rapidly respond to that, and within just, sometimes 24 to 48 hours, provide us with approval so we could get into the field quickly. They've now changed in the United States the way IRB works a little bit. And so now that's not quite as necessary because they've relaxed some of the restrictions. And so I'm not sure how that looks in Canada, but it's definitely worth a shot. And if you ever want us to share any of our information with how we did that, we would love to be able to share that with you.
Thank you.
That's really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a few people that raised hands, I believe. Jeremy, you are the first one, and then Christine, and then Howie.
Thank you. It's still on this theme. I just want to take a bit of a different angle on the ethics side. I heard two things from our presenters. I heard a really interesting comment from Jack about how they prepped up the ethics review board and did some presentation, did some work with them. It'd be really interesting to hear about what that was about and how you did that and kind of what you did. And I also heard from Jocelyn saying that they already had a pretty good, I think you said the same thing, you had a pretty good sort of setup. I think that's good for here and now to start looking at what we can do maybe now as opposed to the future, if you could share.
Jeremy, I could provide an initial response. Specifically for a quick response project myself and Dr. Umaji worked on in 2019 in relationship to flooding. We kind of anticipated there may be some ice jam flooding taking place somewhere in Ontario in the spring of 2019. So when our term started in mid-January, we went into our ethics review board, set up a separate meeting and said, and they found it kind of strange. They said, what are you asking about? They thought we were asking about something we've submitted, and we had to tell them, well, no, we don't have anything submitted yet, but you have a 2 to 4 week period that you say you're going to turn things around. We may be submitting something, but we would like to request a 7 to 10 day turnaround, which is an exception to the rule. Let us explain why. And once we sat down and gave those explanations, the Ethics Review Board was very cooperative in working with us. When we did submit one, it worked out smoother. But then I'd also like to caution that those employees who were working for the Ethics Review Board in 2019 were no longer working for the Ethics Review Board now in 2020. So myself and Dr. Umaji have to consider now more or less doing the whole thing over with the new people who are staffing the board. So if you have a long-term employee who has a lot of institutional knowledge that you can work with over time, that works out well. But you also may be in a situation of shifting chairs and different positions at the university where the education on what we do in the disaster social sciences is a constant. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jack. I think this is helpful to everyone on the line. So thanks for that. Ida,
if I could just add to that. So even ahead of the 2019 visit, when we went even earlier than that, again, there were different faces in the office, but that was where we had the initial conversation and said, we're from the Disaster and Emergency Management Program, and this is likely going to be something that we are going to do. And I think what we ended up doing with project after project, especially with this one individual, is that really maintain that relationship, very appreciative. If we go onto the field, bring it back a souvenir and a thanks, and it just makes it part of the team, includes them in the process, and that helped us. So I think even getting a turnaround in less than 10 days, and we kind of know that that's going to happen in the future if we need a quick response approval.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Jump in quickly on that as well?
Yeah. Oh, Jocelyn, sorry, I couldn't see who was talking.
I know. I think we're more than one gallery screen in Zoom. Thanks, Sophie. So I guess I did something similarly. I don't have a system in place that's as sophisticated as the other researchers, and it's really great to hear about that. I did reach out to folks at the ethics review board just to give them a heads up that I was hoping to do some quick response research. Anything in particular I should be thinking about. I think, then they just knew it was coming, and maybe there was a bit of name recognition around that. I don't think that ever hurts. The way that UBC works, they do have an expedited review process if one of the questions asks you to indicate the amount of risk involved in your study. And so the research that I do, because it's from a legal perspective, tends to be minimal risk, and that I'm interested in interviewing decision makers, right? Not especially about things they're doing in their professional capacity, and so not adding additional stress or trauma to people's lives. And so because of that, the nature of that work, I have a bit of an advantage in getting through that expedited process. I noticed in the chat that Brent had kind of suggested about, doing sort of an initial application and then coming back with provisos. That has been my approach. And so, I have one right now that I have a bunch of provisos that I have to fill in some of the details, upload some documents. And I think that if you're working with a community, like in collaboration with a community, that's inevitable, because you have to wait for the community partner to get back to you with, the details of what the study is going to look like, what are the questions that we want to ask, things like that. So you have to take a more of an iterative approach. And I have found that the ethics review board here has been really receptive to that, and they can turn around those approvals on the provisos pretty quickly. And then the last thing that I would stress is that having a formalized research partnership agreement or research collaboration agreement, I think is incredibly important, not just in terms of having clarity and transparency with the partner that you're working with, but from the university's perspective as well. And so I know UBC is now actually taking steps with a number of First Nations in particular, where there are multiple collaborations within the university, like actually looking towards a university-wide agreement so that there's sort of umbrella frameworks in place.
Yeah. Brent and I were having side conversations, like chat here, because we're both at Waterloo. I'm upcoming PhD student, but I was saying that him and Sue, my supervisor, and some others should get together and have that engagement. So we're going to keep talking about that. Thank you.
That's great. I'm just looking at the time, and I know we have 3 people that wanted to say something. So we could hear from all 3 of you quickly before we move on to the next item on our agenda. So I think Christine, you had to raise your hand, and then Harry and Lori Pierce.
Okay, I'll try and be quick. Just building on the past conversation, I wanted to focus more on early career researchers, and maybe thinking about some of the things that we could possibly do to support them. Because a lot of the strategies that were discussed in the panel before are from more established scholars. So being able to take a back seat or riding shotgun, having patience for some of these things and waiting for publications is not really something that's accessible to postdocs or to someone just starting a tenure track position. So maybe it's something that the ICLR can do, or together with SSHRC, to recognize some of these alternative publications in terms of getting promotion and tenure and that sort of thing. And how can we get away some of the necessity to have the pre-existing relationships with the Research Ethics Board if you're just starting at a new institution and you don't have that possibility. I'm with the Canadian Association of Postdoctoral Scholars, and we just got the results of a national survey, and what we are finding is that postdocs have a number of caregiving responsibilities for their parents and other elderly relatives, as well as young children. So the possibility of doing quick response research is not as accessible to these scholars at this particular point in their lives. So if there's some kind of support for quick childcare or quick elder care that can be built in so that these researchers can do this kind of research. And then one final point was it would be helpful for researchers who aren't part of an institution that has multiple disaster researchers or a disaster unit to be able to tap into some of the other networks and the other institutions that have these trainings for students on ethics and some of the challenges in the field and how to respond with different tools. So whether it's something that ICLR can kind of coordinate and bring us together so we can tap into some of the webinars and give them to our students.
Thanks so much, Christina. One of the focus of this program is really on new and emerging researchers. So your feedback is definitely much appreciated on this. So we'll take good note of this and see what we can do about this moving forward. So thank you. Harry?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I would like to go back a little bit about like the IIB and also share about my experience work at Dalhousie University. To begin with, I would like to thank Laurie and Paul. Actually, they introduced me to this field so that I can develop the Converge IRB model at the University of Colorado Boulder. So during that process, I have like the very system review about both system in Canada and also US. So when I back to Dalhousie University last year, I directly sit on the review board at Dalhousie University. And for this year, I'm very lucky I got 2 quick response grants funded by the Natural Hazard Center. And I also point this out issue for the committee that we need to talk about that, and we really need to have a very specific stream for the quick response research. At Dalhousie University told me that, okay, one thing is that, okay, the time issue. The other thing is that if any proposal involved multiple investigators from multiple organizations, they need to get their IIB approved from their own universities, right? So I remember Paul told me that actually in Alberta and both universities, U Alberta and U Calgary, they have agreement. If the IIB approved by one university, the other university will be accepted. That is a really good thing. I talked with Dalhousie University. We are working on the try to have this also like MOU with other universities in the Atlantic Canada. If we can get one IRB approved, maybe we can use to another like universities. So by saying that, I just want to say that, okay, something is totally doable. And also sometimes for the researcher, we need to be very strong and push the IRB office. So from my personal experience, I really pushed a lot, and my two applications got approved within 1 week. So that is a very unique strategy because because I'm sitting on the board, I know everything they are looking for. So my application maybe do not have a lot of revision needed. So that is very unique. But also, I know that every university, they have a different faculty members sit on the board. And if you can ask help or reach out to those faculty members, ask them to review your application in advance. Maybe that will be save a lot of time in the future for the revisions. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful. And then Laurie Pierce.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. I just have 3 quick points I'd like to make. The first one is I really like the idea of more collaboration amongst universities. And I'm wondering if ICLR would consider putting up a list of interested researchers with a sort of searchable database in a way where you could put in a short bio or even a more extensive CV, but some keywords of research that you're interested in. And then when, for quick response grants, when you're seeing the hard scientists, the engineers, et cetera, hydrologists, if you could add a question or to be answered in the application of, have you considered including a social scientist along with you? That might be a prompt. It's not a end all be all. And then if people are saying, well, I might, but I don't know who, there's a list of researchers that you could go to and see if any of them appeal to you, have a discussion, etc. So that might aid in the collaboration ahead of time. And it could also be a list of researchers and students and early career researchers as well. That could be helpful. So I think that might be helpful. The other thing that I want to talk about is I heard about several tip sheets that I think were really helpful, like the ones about safety for female, or it could be male researchers in the field. The hazards research tip sheet and stuff. I think those are really cross-pan institutional research teams ideas. That's something that ICLR could look at including, and perhaps asking for some collaborative work to put together. No need for every institution to develop them. They'd be pretty much the same stuff. And so I think if we had that up on the website, that also might be very helpful for people. And then you don't have to start from scratch each time, and would benefit from the cross collaboration. And then my other point is, I think there's still a room for a discussion on the pre-approved. We don't have the huge research numbers that the state has. And so it wouldn't be receiving thousands of applications for pre-approval. So I think it's worth a try. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Lori. This was very valuable, and you actually provided a great introduction to to Lori and Jennifer, who are going to speak in more details about the check sheets that they develop, and are going to walk through some, first of all, where they are and how they work to help you all your next quick response research. So thanks for that.
Thank you. And I could listen to this conversation all day. I just wanted to say something before we move over to the resources. I definitely came into this call today really with such a heavy heart, just with everything that is unfolding, not just in our United States, but of course our globe right now. And just the dialogue of division that has taken root in so many corners of our nation right now. But I just wanted to say just how heartened I am by this conversation, and just what I'm getting ready to share with you. Some of these resources are absolutely, they're free, they're ready, they're for anybody, anywhere. But then I'm also loving this conversation about what is it unique to the Canadian context, where different tools and materials and so forth may be built and so forth. And so that's going to lead into what I'm getting ready to share right now are some resources, both that I hope can perhaps be models for things that if Canada were to invest in some of these cross-border sort of sister kind of sharing, but then also some other resources that are already available to all of us. So I'm going to go ahead right now, and I'm actually going to share my internet browser. And so Sophie, can you confirm that you can see my browser right now? Thank you. And then I'm actually gonna bring us, where I'm gonna end with the resources is actually over here to the check sheets, the main event that ICLR so generously supported us to build out, exactly as Lori Pierce just said, so that we aren't recreating the wheel and we have sort of a mechanism for sharing. But based on some of the conversations and comments that have come up today, I actually wanted to point you to a couple of different resources that are available on the converge.colorado.edu website. So first, Sophie, can you give me a thumbs up if I just navigated over to a new page? Can you see the data page right now?
I can see, yeah.
Okay, mobile data collection, you're seeing?
Yes.
Okay, good. So one of the things that I've seen people put up in the chat box today that I just very briefly wanted to share, because the purpose of this workshop is about preparing. What can we do in advance to learn, to get resources and so forth? So I wanted to point you to some resources that the National Science Foundation has invested in the States. And so one of them is at the University of Washington. There is actually one of the facilities that has been funded by the NSF is called the RAPID facility. And the RAPID facility actually provides researchers with equipment. And so like Jack, when you were talking about having an equipment repository, and when Ida was saying perhaps we could check things out, this is exactly the model that we have moved toward in the US in certain corners with. This is a shared use facility where there is a fee that researchers pay if they want to get a drone so they can do visual research across communities and so forth. So that we're also working directly with Rapid on a mobile data collection application that is currently available for download, and we have iPads that you can check out. How Ray actually set these up at the Natural Hazard Center, and the Rapid facility has them for checkout, where you can have an iPad and you can actually set up your own survey as part of this Rapid application that has been built. So that's one resource. A second resource that I wanted to share that is open to all of us is this design safe cyber infrastructure, which has also been funded by the National Science Foundation, and it is the cyber infrastructure for the hazards and disaster community, where you can actually go and publish your data sets. You can access already published research instruments and protocols. And I share that because one of the things we're going to talk about this during the after workshop more, about once you have the data, how can you curate it and publish it? But I bring it up now because one of the things we're trying to achieve with our partnership with Design Safe is to both bring more social scientists into the cyber infrastructure, because right now it's been predominantly engineers who have accessed and published their quantitative data, but we've been working with them on a data model that is appropriate for social sciences and interdisciplinary scholars, so that we can better share our research instruments, tools, and technologies in advance of a disaster, have them published, get a digital object identifier or DOI attached so you can get credit for what you have done in the past, but then also so we don't recreate the wheel, so we can access already used data collection instruments and protocols, and they can be published up there in Design Safe. So that's a second resource I wanted to share. A third resource that I wanted to share, I talked about this briefly in my opening remarks, but I just wanted to show you this page because we have been talking more about how can we get organized, how can we have lists, how can we have information about what people are doing. And that's really what the NSF has been investing in with these extreme events, reconnaissance, and research networks, so that we can both get organized within disciplinary communities, but then also so we can work more effectively across disciplinary communities. So exactly what Paul said about when there's a group of structural engineers who are going out to do damage assessments, now for the first time, we really are collectively organized in such a way that if STEER, and they really did this, for example, after Hurricane Dorian, when parts of the Bahamas were so devastated, STEER reached out to us with the Social Science Extreme Events Research Network, and they said, we're getting ready to send a reconnaissance team to the Bahamas. We have approval from the Bahamian government. Do you have social scientists who can travel with us, who are interested in some of the issues that we have already identified with our early virtual reconnaissance? And so this collectively organizing and sharing information has been really transformative for us to, again, work within our disciplinary boundaries, but then also to work more effectively across them. Fourth resource I'm excited to share with you today that how Ray just mentioned and has been absolutely integral to developing. So as I mentioned, core to the mission of Converge is to advance ethically informed and scientifically rigorous hazards and disaster research. And so one of the first things we said when we were launching Converge is that we know that the hazards and disaster field is very event driven, that there are of course core researchers like all of you on this call who've dedicated your lives to studying hazards and disasters. But then when a big event happens, oftentimes people who may not know about the history, the theory, the background of hazards and disaster research, they have this opportunity to learn, to join the field, but how could they quickly learn about what has already been done? And that was sort of the question that led to the development of the Converge training modules series, where we said, we know that people aren't going to become expert in hazards and disaster research after doing a 30-minute training module. But what can we do to at least let people know that there is knowledge and there is information out there that researchers are already studying, but there are still many questions to be pursued. And so that's sort of at the heart of the training modules series, which all of you can access this. We've had over 1,000 people register for these modules. More and more professors are assigning them for their their classes. And so I really want to encourage you to please take advantage. Chris, I was so struck by what you said about the different inequalities that researchers are experiencing. And so right now, this is again a free resource open to everybody that we hope, as everybody's transitioning to online classes, could you maybe assign one of these training modules in your classes to help take some of the burden off of you as maybe an early career postdoc or professor, but also then to help your students to move forward. So a few words about these training modules. Again, they're all free. They're online on the Converge website. They take about 30 to 60 minutes to complete. And when you're done with them, we have questions that you fill out and you end up completing 10 questions. If you get 8 out of 10 right, you get a certificate of completion. And we actually have 30 to 40 questions on every module, so they're on a rotator. So if you do want to assign them to your students will not get the same questions, but they can all have the opportunity to get a certificate. So right now we have 3 modules that are live on social vulnerability and disasters, disaster mental health, and how Ray actually also led the development of the cultural competence in hazards and disaster research. And I know that was something that Brent called for in his remarks of wanting more training and information on this. And so we have a training module. Within 2 days, as how Ray alluded to, we're getting ready to release our 4th training module, which is focused on institutional review board procedures for hazards and disasters. Because one of the things we've learned with working with our engineering and natural science colleagues is sometimes they haven't even heard of IRB, but when we start collaborating in multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary teams, it's very important to have this kind of common background and knowledge. And so kudos to how Ray and the team who led forth the institutional review board module that again is going to be released this week. And then following that, in the coming weeks, we will be releasing our 5th module, which is focused on conducting emotionally challenging research. And that was actually led by 3 sociology PhD students here at the University of Colorado Boulder who came to me after they'd done research in Nepal after the earthquake, Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, and they said we were not prepared for the emotional challenge that we would experience in this. And I said, can we work together to create a module? And they ended up working with the Converge team. And so that will be the next one we're going to release. And then you can see, to all the wonderful participants in this call, several other that we have planned to develop over the 5 years of this Converge project. But we really want to say, if you have ideas for modules, we want this to be community driven based on what you're seeing and what you're needing. So please reach out to me. Please let me know if you think we really need a module on this topic, because this is a recurring issue that we're seeing in the field and we need some kind of training. The other one I did want to point out, because of something that Brent said during his remarks about needing more training for the potential risks that female researchers may face while in the field, as well as other potential researchers who may be in other marginalized groups. We actually have a new partnership with Jerrica Heinze, who runs the Fieldwork Initiative to Stop Sexualized Trauma. They have thousands of members across the globe who have joined together in response to the fact that so many women, as well as trans researchers and other researchers in marginalized groups, have experienced sexualized trauma. And so we are partnering with Jerrica this summer to develop the first module on understanding and ending gender-based violence in fieldwork. And she already did a preliminary training with our team. And I have to tell you, everyone, it was transformative to even have this conversation. And we're so excited to partner with Jerrica to roll this forward. So please, I see the chat box lighting up, but I can't read it right now. But if you have ideas for modules, please share them with Jennifer and I, because we are so excited to learn from you. So 4th resource. Now I'm going to go to the main event, and then I'm going to turn it back to Jen to get your feedback. So as I mentioned at the outset, thanks to ICLR and the vision and generosity of Paul and Sophie and the entire team, when they found out that we were launching Converge and developing these resources for early career researchers, students, and others who are new to the field, Paul reached out and he said, Lori, one of the things we heard in our 2017 workshop is that we need we just need some brief check sheets, some checklists, things that people could bring into the field when they're getting ready to do quick response research. So Jen and I, we talked to Paul, we came back together and we said, what can we do to get this series launched? And so thanks to the support of ICLR, and I'm so happy to share this for the first time with all of our Canadian friends and colleagues today, that we now have the Extreme Events Research Check Sheets series is live. And as you can see on your screen, these check sheets, they are intentionally meant to be brief, 1 to 2 to 3 pages, easily consumable, and to point researchers to these are some of the key issues that you should be thinking about as you're considering conducting quick response research or hazards and disaster research generally. And so just like with this workshop series is organized into how do you get ready before quick response research, what happens during the disaster, how can you be ready for getting into the field, and then what do you do after? Our series is very similarly aligned in that way. And so you can see here, each of these boxes contain a series of check sheets or check sheets forthcoming. And so we have several categories, including preparing to conduct extreme events research, IRB and ethical considerations, social science methods and approaches, although we're getting ready to partner with our engineering colleagues to also work with them to develop some check sheets for engineers who do damage assessments. We also have check sheets forthcoming on training researchers and building teams, check sheets on collecting data and conducting fieldwork, on data management and data use, data analysis and data publication, and then best practices for sharing and returning results. And so if you're given the topic of our workshop, if you're interested and you say, okay, what are the check sheets you have available already on preparing to conduct extreme events research? You can click in there, you go in there, and you can see at present, we have 4 check sheets that are already available in this particular category on how to do research design, conducting systematic literature review, which how Ray led, and approaches for this. And then we also have, excuse me, so I'm gonna go back here to this one and actually click on this one. On the approaches one, approaches to sampling. So if you're getting ready, you're writing your proposal. Here's an example of what the check sheets actually look like, where you can go in and you could say, okay, I'm building out my proposal and here's just a high level overview of different approaches to sampling. And all kudos to Jennifer for not only contributing to this series in a serious way, but also for figuring out the design. Here is an example of a research design table that, again, students, early career researchers, those new to the field could actually work through in the context of the research, and on and on and on. So there are several up there that are available for your review. And now I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer so that Jennifer can lead you through. So I'm going to stop this share. And then I thank you for listening to that, everyone. And then I'm going to move back here to the slides because Jennifer has prepared a set of discussion prompts for some of our remaining time together.
And while Lori's doing that and getting the screen shared, I just wanted to let you know too, with those training modules that she mentioned that you go and get a certificate at the end, we've already had many people use that in their classrooms, and then we've asked them to please create an assignment bank. So we have an assignment bank. If you scroll down the training modules page, that has, similar to the check sheet layout, it has an assignment. So it actually shows what class it was used for, how it was used, what the assignment was that they assigned to their students, and which training module they had to complete as part of their assignment to get points and everything. So we already have some of those examples, and so we want to make it so easy for teachers to be able to go in there, look at our assignment bank, grab one that's fitting for their class, and just update it based on how they want to offer it to their own students. And so those resources are, yeah, there it is right there.
And there's an example of the certificate your students can get, or others if you assign these. And then the check sheets, and Jen, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, perfect. And so we just wanted to open this up to conversation and really kind of kick off the open discussion that's going to happen after this, but really wanted to talk to each of you about how you would use these check sheets, what your thoughts are, and just like people often say that no good deed goes unpunished. I've already heard so many great ideas from all the presenters, and I want to invite all of them to help contribute to our check I can't speak today, check sheet series. And yeah, because we're going to roll out a bunch more in the future. And so we're not only authoring them ourselves and with our own team, but we're inviting other scholars to contribute as well. And so feel free to use the chat function, but also feel free to raise your hand. We're just going to open it up for discussion. The questions we want to cover start with, how would you use the check sheets in your own work that you're doing right now, or that you plan to do in the future?
And I'll stop sharing actually, Jen, so we can see each other.
Okay. Yeah, because I have them all listed, so I can just go through them and ask more questions as the conversation moves forward.
Awesome, and I'll put these up in the chat box in case people just wanna, you know, respond. Thank you, Jen.
That's perfect.
Laurie, it's Paul. If I can just start us off, and Jennifer, thank you. Right, I mean, amazing, and the leadership is really appreciated. Thank you. Specifically with the check sheets, so you've got something you're ready to put up now. I think most of the check sheets, but also the rest of Converge is probably a living document. Like it's not like it's set in stone and will never change kind of thing. Is that fair that you're looking for constantly for feedback on the check sheets, but across the broader initiative?
Absolutely right, Paul. So one thing is we do want to keep them pretty short because we want them to be really accessible and usable and not turn into a 10-page document for each one. And so if people have ideas about and suggestions about expanding it, sometimes that might turn into a new check sheet that's more specific on an area, or we can add to the check sheets we currently have. So we can update those PDF documents and repost them online that has additional information if you have other suggestions too.
And the nice thing, Paul, about that is you're absolutely right. So for example, once we rolled out the training modules, we would hear from people who'd published a paper. In fact, Rena Papadopoulos, who is a leading cultural competence researcher, she wrote us after we rolled out the cultural competence module, and we used a lot of her work in the module. And she said, oh, I'd like to do this, this, and this. And so we actually updated the module. We added Rena as an additional author on the module because of her contributions. And so they're very much, both the training modules are living documents, and as Jen said, this briefing sheets or the check sheet series, we've tried to set up a broad framework, but I already today, I came up with like 10 different check sheets that I heard about that we need to have in this series. So very much living, very much looking for your contributions.
The other question I had,
able to be updated.
The other thought I had before everybody, I'm sure, wants to jump in. You shared earlier, Jennifer, you shared earlier all of the different quick response grants that have been done over the years by the center. And the majority were for various natural hazards, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, etc., but not all of them. Certainly on the Canadian side, where ICLR is right now, we're focused on natural hazards, and we would love to get more going. Do you think these check sheets naturally fit across all of the different quick response initiatives they're taking? Or do you think it would be quite different if people are looking at a flood compared to a hurricane or something?
That's a really good question, Paul. I think that most of them lend themselves to research in general. I think a lot of the check sheets are really, you know, yes, it's about disaster response, but it also is about conducting research in general. And so there are many like that, but I could also see it being very useful to have one that's specific on, you know, if there was a terrorist attack or if there was a specific disaster type that needed more guidance on what to do in that particular circumstance, that we could have a check sheet that lends itself to that as well. So Lori, do you have anything to add about that?
I absolutely agree. And one of the things Jen and I observed when we first started working with many engineers on many different projects is oftentimes engineers, they identify by the hazard they're studied. They're wind engineers or they're earthquake engineers, as to where social scientists, oftentimes we don't as often identify by a hazard type, but instead we oftentimes identify in different sorts of ways associated with our discipline and the populations we study, the policies and so forth. And so I absolutely agree with Jen that most of these are meant to be cross-cutting regardless of hazard type and to deal with those sort of core research issues. But with that said, COVID-19, I mean, Jack Rozzolski's working group that he's leading, as well as Eric's research working group that he's leading, they're really looking at new methods and approaches that this particular pandemic is stretching us into as a research community. And as we work with some of our engineering colleagues, they've talked about, well, but there are different safety concerns in an earthquake versus a terrorist event, for example, as Jen said. So Paul, it is a great question. Right now, we don't have hazard specific per se, but I think as we continue with these collaborations and conversations, we are hoping that as those issues present themselves, that we can be flexible and hopefully invite in a check sheet in the sort of way you're suggesting.
Thank you.
Great.
Does anyone else have questions or comments for Lori and Jennifer? Oh, Lori Pierce, I see your raised hand already.
Yeah, thank you. I think one of the things, I love the idea of these check sheets. I think one of the things that could be done, and it sort of gets to one of the other bullets on your sheet, was around the Canadian context. And that is around, and also refers back to the discussions that Jocelyn had around working with First Nations communities. They are so varied and so different across the country. But nevertheless, I think there are some key questions that could be pulled out that would really be helpful to students and to professors in terms of working with First Nations and at the special requirements around working with First Nations. SSHRC has lots of information about it. I think that some of that could be distilled down into some key questions that might be really helpful.
Thank you very much, Lori. This is great. I saw many other great suggestions in the chat box. I think Lori and Jen, you're nodding, so yeah.
I'm gonna actually I'm gonna go through and read the guiding questions again, yes, since they are on the screen. So the guiding questions were: how would you use the check sheets? Do you have recommendations for sharing these tools with the broader research community? What topics would you like to see added to the series? Would you like to author a check sheet? And is there something unique to the Canadian context, as Lori suggested, that needs a check sheet?
And I'll answer, thank you, Jen. And I'll answer Chris's question really quickly about, are they available in French? Right now, we have a COVID-19 research registry that is available in French, as well as Spanish, Italian, and Mandarin Chinese on the Converge website. But we have not translated any of the check sheets. We just didn't have the time or resources to do that, but we would absolutely be welcome to any sort of partnership to further strengthen these ties. But right now they're not available in other languages. Thank you for asking.
This is Jack. I had one comment on a potential worksheet that could apply to both Canada and the United States that I don't think I saw on the list of worksheets. But many times a researcher from any discipline who is engaging in some type of disaster has to interact with public authorities who manage disasters. And for example, in the United States, you would focus on a county level emergency manager as an important person. In Canada, that would be a CEMC. But for example, a check sheet on what are the basic structures and functions of emergency management potentially in Canada and for that matter for the United States. In the United States, going from DHS to FEMA to state to county to municipal level. In Canada, Public Safety Canada, the 10 provinces and the differences between how provincial level emergency management organizations interact with regional municipalities. That type of prep sheet may be of use to people who are interested in certain aspects of disasters, but not necessarily fluent in the government context and structures of, I guess, the potential characters that one might be interacting with in the field. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Before Paul, I saw you have a comment. Gloria and Jennifer and Paul, I just want to point you to a comment that Jocelyn made in the chat box of potential authors. So thank you for that. We'll definitely keep that in mind. Super helpful. So Paul?
I had a quick question I want to direct toward Jocelyn, Jack, Aida, and Brent. Sorry. So one of the thoughts could be that ICLR will only fund academic researchers who have ethics approval. We're trying to be as flexible as we can, but that's a requirement. And we're trying to be flexible that maybe you don't have approval before you get in the field. And anyway, but anyway, we've been considering the idea, might we request of anybody who applies for ICLR funding that they have applied these checklists, or they know about the checklists, or they've thought about the checklists, or I'm not quite certain what we might bring in here, but it might even be a question of you to look at the checklist and say, hey, this one is really different. Like if they haven't read this is a problem. Anyway, we're trying to be flexible, but is there a sense here that any of you think that we might sneak another requirement here? And in particular, I'm raising the question, as Lori raised a very helpful comment on the Indigenous side. I've seen some well-meaning people step into some bad circumstances. And is this a way to make sure that we don't have somebody who may look like they've got a good proposal, but we don't want to fund them and get them out there because they haven't thought through some basics? Should we use these checklists as a condition of getting ICLR funding?
Well, maybe I'll jump in, and this is probably not the answer you'd expect from a lawyer, but I might start with a soft approach. So rather than jumping right to a precondition, just include the links to that resource, to that database, right, in the calls for quick response research that go out. And certainly from my perspective, and I'd love to hear from others, like I'm hungry for resources, right? Like it's not going to take somebody to say, you must do this, you know, for me to go out and do it. Like I am really looking for tips and support about how to do this research well. And I'd like to think that other researchers are doing the same. And so, you know, I guess this is the, you know, the opposite of what you might expect, which is that not to necessarily jump to a sort of a formal or kind of punitive approach, right? If something gentler might work.
And Jocelyn, that's actually exactly what we decided to do for the Quick Response Grant Program at the Natural Hazard Center, is in all the paperwork that people have to fill out, their agreements once they get approved and everything. We have all the links for all of the training modules and the check sheets for them to review, but it is a suggestion. And I think we even maybe on our program guidelines page, like they have to click a box saying that they know these things exist or that they've seen these, but it's not a requirement to get the funding.
I mean, if I could just jump in, I think especially just thinking back to some of the proposals that we had to put in on a very quick turnaround, I think having one extra requirement to make that happen would just, you know, really complicate matters, especially when you're already stressed out trying to get something out. But I think, especially when it comes to certain issues, you know, particularly sensitive circumstances with, for example, working with Indigenous communities, I think at that point, those resources can be more definitely encouraged to be used. And then also maybe if you find that a proposal isn't in line with best practice, and at that point you'll say, well, you know, here's a resource that would have strengthened your application, but I don't think it's going to be approved at this time for these reasons.
I think that's great, and it's something also I think ICLR could take on when we do send back a successful approval. It would be fairly easy, I think, for us, knowing the resources, to share the links of specific check sheets or trainings that might be helpful before you deploy. So that's a great suggestion.
Oh, and this is a brief comment from Jack. I would agree with my colleague Ida on no one wants any more burdens, especially me. But I think I will take a different stance here. This work is dangerous and it's significant, and as much of a pain as an IRB or a checklist or a certification is, that also provides me as a researcher indemnification when I'm in the field from legal problems, which I have come very close to sometimes in disaster research. I would also like to say it only takes one well-intentioned person to go into the field, not know what they're doing, and poison the field for all of us. So I think it would be important to have, as I guess Quick Response expands in Canada, to have a firm baseline of what our minimal expectations are for safety, not only for the communities we're going into, but safety for ourselves as researchers, because I'm not going to tell stories about it, but I could tell many stories of almost getting into deep trouble and learning in the field, because the work we do in Quick Response can be very tenuous in certain community situations, and anything to raise the awareness of the seriousness, if it would be a checklist or pre-approvals. Even though as a researcher, I resent the bureaucracy, in some ways I like the bureaucracy because it has a purpose that's important, I think. Thank you.
Thank you, Jack. Brent, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think in general, we do have to be very careful. We have to, at the same time as providing opportunities for research for students through a rapid response program, we have a responsibility to also make sure they're doing their research safely and ethically, and with the perspective of the community firmly in the front. So yeah, I would just echo that. I do think a voluntary agreement at the end of an application, yes, I will pursue these check sheets. Yes, I will attempt to be certified. I think that's a really strong message.
Thank you so much, Brent. Is there anyone else on the line that would like to add something on this topic? Don't see any hands. Just looking at the time and the agenda, we don't have that much more time, so I just want to first of all personally thank you everyone for making the time to not only show up but actively participate. I don't think you can, or you can see how helpful this is to us, and this is the main objective of this program, to grow this community, to make it better, safer for everyone. So thank you so much for that. I'm going to pass it on to Paul, Lori, and Jennifer, to, if you have any closing remarks, and also remember the dates of our next workshops. I don't have them with me right now. Oh yeah, I believe it's July. I'll find them. I'll write them in the chat box. Sorry, July 24th and September 9th. Sorry, thank you.
Again, I just echo Sophie's comments. Thank you, everybody, for making the time to be with us here today. This is a really important community. I look forward to working together and trying to allow us to play a bigger role and a more influential role going forward. I think there's a number of people that we interact with that would really like to see us do more and play a bigger role, but we want to do it properly. And we've had a sense that just a very small amount of money can help. We're not a source of a lot of money, but a little bit of money can help. And sometimes it's not money. And so we hope that tools and other things, a voice, a variety of different ways. And so having you participate today was really helpful to us. We didn't think we'd cover it all today. So the point is to have a couple meetings like this and try to pull together what we hear from you and use it to move us together, so forward together. So please keep giving us feedback during the session, but even afterward. Your specific ideas, we look forward to embrace them and move them forward. And thank you for your time. Lori, over to you.
Thank you so much, Paul and Sophie, for bringing this all together. And thank you for Mike, who has been with us the whole time to make sure we don't lose connectivity. And it has just been a gift to get to spend this time with all of you. And Jennifer and I had just a few last, in our spirit of sharing resources and information, we had a few last slides we were going to share with you today. To hopefully continue our collaboration. And so just a couple of things we wanted to point you to. One, that through Converge, we have been compiling a number of COVID-19 related resources and engaging in various activities that I'll share with you briefly in a moment. Also through the Natural Hazard Center, as part of our job as the nation's information clearinghouse, one of the things we do oftentimes during large scale events is mobilize as a team to try to curate and collect information. And so Jolie Breeden has been leading this effort along with several other members of the Natural Hazard Center team to really be compiling and again curating COVID-19 related resources for the natural hazards research and practice community. So that's up on our Hazard Center website. I also, for all of you out there on the call, I know several of you have already registered your project, but we have launched the first COVID-19 Global Research Registry for Public Health and Social Sciences Studies, so we can better amplify the efforts of our broader research community. And this is the material that is available not just in English, but also again in French, Spanish, Italian, and Mandarin Chinese. And so if you're out there on the call and you've launched a COVID-19 research project, we'll hope you'll take a few minutes to just go and register that project online, so we have a record of it and can help promote and share it to the research community, but also to the others who are very interested in the work that you're doing. For example, just to make this really concrete, the National Academies of Science and the National Science Foundation and several other partners, including the Sloan Foundation, recently launched a Societal Experts Action Network, or what they call SHAN. And the Societal Experts Action Network is all about trying to reach back into our research community to figure out what it is that we know and how it is what we're learning about COVID-19 can be brought to bear on the incredible, incredible challenges that we are facing as a society. And so this research registry is one of the stops that Sean is using to try to figure out what's happening in our community. So we hope you'll take a few minutes to register your study if you have one on COVID-19. We also, several of you on this call are leading working groups for public health and social sciences research, which are rooted in a convergence research vision and are bringing together researchers across disciplines to tackle many challenges and problems. And you can go to the Converge website to learn more about the approximately 80 working groups that have mobilized since the COVID-19 crisis. And again, so many thanks to the leaders who are on this call from Canada who are moving forward with several of these working groups. And then with that, I am turning it over to the always wonderful Jennifer Tobin. And as I turn it over, I want to say this about her, that I was Jennifer and I have been together since I was a young assistant professor and she was a new graduate student at Colorado State University. And yesterday I was reading a book and the book was talking about collaboration and why collaboration is so important. Jack talked about getting to drive side by side with Ida in the car as one sort of metaphor. And this book I was reading that was talking about why two eyes are better than one is because two eyes are what give us three-dimensional vision. And I just wanted to say, since the day I met Jennifer in 2006, it has been like I went from a one-dimensional view of the world to having a whole world that has been opened up. So with that, so many thanks, Jennifer, and I want to thank Paul and Sophie, and over to you, Jennifer Tobin.
Well, thank you, Lori. Yes, and Lori and I have been working together now, fast forward 13 years. So it has been a long time, and we've had many of those special moments in the field doing quick response research together. And I've been feel so lucky to have had all those experiences. And it is a fluster and it's crazy and lots goes on in the car and it does require a team. And any way we can help to be, have this community help to be better prepared to go into that field to make it less stressful, I think the better. So that's what our intentions always are, is to help everybody else be able to carry out the important work you do. But with the closing of this wonderful workshop, I wanted to invite you to our 45th annual, but first ever virtual Natural Hazards Research and Applications Workshop. We are going to be hosting it this year again, sadly virtually, but I think there's going to be a lot of great benefits to having it virtual. For those of you who have attended the Natural Hazards Workshop in the past, you know we have concurrent sessions, and you usually have to choose one session that you want to go to. But this year, we're going to have them all recorded. So if you are registered for the workshop, You will then be able to go back and watch any session you would like. So I feel like you're getting, 5 times as much information as you would if you would attended in person. So the dates are the same as we typically would have them. The dates are July 12th to the 15th. It's going to be held virtually, like I said, and information is available on our website, which I see this link on the bottom is broken. So you can just Google our website and you'll see the workshop tab. The theme this year is Active Hope in an Era of Environmental Extremes. I have to tell you that Lori Peak read this fabulous book called Active Hope, which I've now read as well, which is amazing. And that was what inspired the theme prior to COVID happening. However, it's become more and more relevant, I think, as the days progress. So we're going to have a lot of new panels that we weren't expecting to have based on COVID and COVID research and the things that are happening in the world today, along with our typical, other disaster-related sessions. So I'm really excited this year to have everybody there, and I do hope you'll join us. We have tried to keep registration costs as low as we possibly can. We've lowered the amount from an in-person event, so hopefully it's affordable to more people. Hopefully more international people can attend, given that there's not the travel-related expenses that come with it. So we are really looking forward to a great turnout that's not limited by space capacity and travel limitations. Lori, if you could go to the next slide, please. And then just like in typical years, we are having the annual researchers meeting follow virtually on July 15th and 16th. And this is just researcher specific presentations. We do have a new track on COVID. So all the people that were funded with our Quick Response Research Grant Program were invited to present their research or even their preliminary findings, or even just the idea, if they haven't started conducting their research yet, the idea of what they're going to do and talk about that. So we'll have a lot of presentations based off our Quick Response Grant Program for the COVID special call. The theme this year is the data revolution, ethical imperatives, and methodological considerations for hazards and disaster research. So I know Lori, based on a lot of your wonderful feedback, went in to talk about our different resources in terms of partnering with the RAPID facility, with Design Safe to publish your data. All of these institutions and organizations will be represented at the researchers meeting, and they'll be presenting on the work they do, and they're going to have little workshops and stuff for everybody to be able to learn how to publish your data and learn how to access these tools that are available. So we hope you'll attend that as well. Next slide, please. And with that, we'll just say thank you so much. We are so thankful to Paul and Sophie and for the funding to help support the check sheet series. I think it's going to be a transformative thing for our field. And like everybody said, I wish there was a sheet available. Now there's going to be all these sheets available. So it's a collaborative effort. We invite all of you to let us know if you have one you want to author, if you want to co-author something, if you just have an idea that you say somebody else should do this. If other authors need to be added to current check sheets, please let us know. And as we are constantly evolving and producing more and more tools and resources, the best way to keep up with that is to sign up on our Hazard Center website, but also on the Converge Center website on our sign up pages, so that you get the emails that come out that say, look at this new thing we're doing, or we'd like to invite you to contribute to something, or here's the information about the workshop. You'll get those emails if you're signed up. So we hope that you'll do that as well. And so thank you again. And it's been wonderful to see all of you and to hear from your experiences.
Thank you so much, everyone. This meeting has been recorded, so if any of you missed anything or need any resources, please reach out to me. Be happy to share with you. I'm looking at the time. We did great. Excited. So thank you so much once again for everyone who made the time to participate. And we very much hope to see you in July for meeting number 2. So have a great afternoon or morning, wherever you are, and we'll see you very soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Well, so much.